Excused.
Excused. Coleman. Cutter. Duran. Eskar. Exum. Froelich. Galindo. Garnett. Geithner. Gonzalez Gutierrez. Gray. Gray.
Excused.
Excused. Hanson. Herod. Herod.
Excused.
Excused.
Representative Baisley's here.
Representative Baisley is present. Hooton. Humphrey. Jackson. Hawkes Lewis. Kennedy. Kip. Kraft Tharp. Landgraf.
She's here.
Larson. Lewis. Liston. Lontine. McCluskey. McKean. McLaughlin. Melton. Excused. Michelson Janae. Mullica. Neville. Pelton. Ransom. Rich. Roberts. Sane. Sandridge. Singer. Sirota. Snyder. Soper. Sullivan. Tipper. Tatone. Valdez A. Valdez D.
Good morning, Colorado.
Van Winkle. Weissman. Will. Williams. Wilson. Madam Speaker.
Here. With 58 present, seven excused, we have a quorum. Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's the middle of the night. Let's start this day off right and vote yes and not be full of spite. Madam Speaker, I move that the Journal of Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019, be read at length. No, I'm sorry. Be approved as corrected by the clerk.
Wow. Wow. You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye!
All opposed say no. No! The motion passes. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I just wanted to give you a quick update on something kind of sad, very sad, super sad, and very tragic. Christine Chechi, who's our Journal clerk, just had a sudden loss in her family, literally like within the hour. And so just keep her and her family in your thoughts and prayers. And she's going through something very, very tragic. So I just want to make sure we updated everybody in the body.
Thank you, Majority Leader Garnett. Mr. Randall, do you have any reports? We're going to read a couple reports and we're going to introduce a bill. Reports of committees of reference.
Committee on Education. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends following Senate Bill 216 be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations. Committee on Judiciary. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends following Senate Bill 30 be referred favorably to the Committee on Appropriations.
Message from the Senate.
Madam Speaker, the
Message from the Senate will be printed in the Journal. Introduction of bill.
Senate Bill 224 by Senator Gonzalez and Fenberg, also Representatives Herod and Van Winkle, concerning the continuation of the regulated marijuana programs in connection there with implementing the recommendations contained in 2018 Censure Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies and making an appropriation.
Senate Bill 224 is assigned to the Committee on Finance. Announcements and introductions. Any introductions? Anyone? Oh, lots of introductions. Representatives Sane and Eskar.
Madam Speaker, Representative Jackson stole my box. Please tell her to give it back.
Representative Eskar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Sane insisted we come up here and remind you one more time. When you come back today, after you go home and maybe sleep an hour or so and you come back today, you can come back in jeans wearing denim if you have paid your $5, and we'll talk more about CICASA and all the amazing work they do and why we need to support this cause tomorrow.
Representative Singh.
And thank you, Madam Speaker. And for you ladies that need to change, if you would like to use Office 212, please do so. Just close the door.
Any other announcements? Representative Kraft-Thorpe.
I do have my clothes here.
Thank you. Business Affairs and Labor Committee, if I could have your attention, please. We have 4 bills that are listed in the calendar for our meeting, our committee meeting at 1:30 today. But in addition, there are 2 other bills that I've already told you about, but we have a 7th bill that was introduced today. I think it's House Bill 1330. It's a Representative Arndt bill. So please take this time tonight to be able to review that as Representative Arndt, any questions that you may have. See you at 1:30.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to welcome the students from Prairie Middle School. They're not here. They're at home asleep right now. But I just want to welcome them whenever they decide to come. Thank you.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this has been a long night, and tomorrow is going to be a day where we're all just going to be kind of dragging a little bit. But there's a very good lunch prepared for you at the University Club, and it's the Energy Caucus. We're going to be talking about lots and lots and lots of energy types and good things. It's tomorrow at the University Club at noon. We would like to see you there, and it's a delightful, brisk walk down the street where you kind of get your blood moving, and it's all good.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative McLaughlin is asking where it is or what time it is. When? It's today. It's today. And
Wednesday.
This will, of course, be the
Today.
last Energy Caucus lunch.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also, today we're having aerospace. Please, if you have not RSVP'd for lunch, hope to see you there at the Sherman Building, 6th floor at noon. Aerospace with my colleague and Representative Ransom will be there.
Okay.
We hope you'll be there this today in a few hours here at noon across the street. Thank you.
Representative Tipper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Finance Committee. Oh, excuse me, Madam Speaker. Ooh.
It's all good.
Oh.
I'm really not even sure who you are right now.
That's fair. Finance Committee. Our Finance Chair has turned into a pumpkin. I don't know where she is, but she's asked me to tell you that we're meeting in room 112 today, and we have several bills: Senate Bill 146, 205, 153, 218, and then House Bill 1329, Arndt and McKean. Oh yes, and if you find a glass slipper size 9.5, 10, turn it into the sergeant's.
Anyone else? Anyone? Who's in the chair? Representative Singer. You have heard the motion. Seeing no objection, Representative Singer will take the chair.
What was I doing? Good morning. The House will come back to order. The committee will come back to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for reading a bill at length. Committee amendments are printed and in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and your iPads. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the Majority Leader, and the coat rule is relaxed. Mr. Randall. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to proceed out of order for immediate consideration of House Bill 1312 as amended.
Mr. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just so we're back to where we were.
We're going to let Mr. Randall, Mr. Minority Leader will come back to you after Mr. Randall lets us know exactly where we're at. Please proceed, Mr. Randall.
House Bill 1312 by Representative Mullica, also Senators Gonzalez and Priola, concerning modernizing immunization requirements for school entry to improve vaccination rates.
Mr. Assistant Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move L025, and it is displayed.
All right, L025 has been moved and is properly displayed. Is there any further discussion? Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sandridge, we're going to pause this real quick. Technical difficulties. I'm going to let Representative Mullica move the bill. Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1312 as amended.
Okay, House Bill 1312 has been moved, and now we are back to Amendment L025. I'm going to say it's been moved and it has been properly displayed, and whoever would like to talk about L025, just come on up at this point. Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do stand in support of this amendment. What it mostly does is, there are some active concerns about the government compiling information they don't need on people. So this isn't just a specific parental rights issue. This is a right to not to have your information given to the government. It's a privacy issue associated with parents. It does get people very nervous, even if you look out through history, when the government compiles information on you and they don't need it. It makes people nervous. There's been many countries in the past that have done this and use the information unwisely and in an unethical manner. So let's just take a step back and remember that we're here to represent our constituents, our district, our parents. And we're not here to override them or gather information on them that we don't need. They don't want this. They don't want us to be tracking what they do. They don't want us to be documenting what they give their children and what they don't give their children. And they don't want us to be using this information to make them feel bad if they choose to go a different path than what certain government officials want. So with that said, I ask for an aye vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion on Amendment L025. Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L025, the question before the body is the passage of Amendment L025. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The noes have it. L025 fails. Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we've heard a lot of concerns since the start of this process and to committee and up to today. One of those main concerns that I heard in emails and from others was that this bill would affect homeschoolers. That was never the intent, that this would affect homeschoolers. It came to my attention the night of the committee that there was a piece that this would affect homeschoolers. And so with that being said, I would like to move Amendment L029 and have it be properly displayed.
Amendment L029 has been moved and is now properly displayed. To Amendment L029, Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so this amendment keeps the homeschool process status quo. Currently in the system, homeschoolers have to still have their immunization records on file or a statement of exemption on file if requested by the superintendent of the school. That's what's in the homeschool part of the statute. This amendment specifically makes where this policy does not apply to homeschoolers. And so we're sticking to what we said originally, that this doesn't apply to homeschoolers, and that's what this amendment does, and I would ask for a yes vote, please.
Representative Geithner, to the amendment L029.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I would urge a yes vote on this. I think it is important that the intent of the bill as it was introduced in committee before we began our 14 hours that it does honor the intent, which I believe Representative Mullica had the full intention of, which was to see to it that the homeschool community was not impacted. I believe this is a good amendment that does that, and I appreciate the amendment being offered.
To the amendment, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also would like to say thank you to Representative Malka for working with us on this particular amendment, just making sure it's explicit, and for adding independent schools in there as well. I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Representative Mullica for bringing this amendment. A lot of you probably don't know, my wife and I homeschooled our girls. Our youngest daughter is in the process of starting to homeschool her kids. She's the one that had the child that had the reaction. So Representative Mullica told me right off the start when he started on this that he wanted to hold homeschool kids harmless, and I appreciate him bringing this amendment, and I am in full support of this amendment.
Further discussion on L029. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Mullica. I think this is good work. You know, there's a lot of times we run complex bills and we come down here and we're not necessarily attorneys and we rely on folks, and I think this is a great example of a representative sticking true to his word and following through on that, and I just want to thank you for that, sir.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L029 or anyone else who would like to thank Representative Mullica? Thank you, Representative Mullica. Seeing no further discussion, the question before the body is passage of Amendment L029. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. L029 passes. Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of sticking to the theme of trying to address some of the concerns that we've heard during this process. One of those concerns was around the state using the ASIP schedule and having the state follow that ASIP schedule when it comes to what immunizations go on that schedule. That was a concern that was addressed, I think, on multiple levels during this process, specifically working with my colleagues on this side of the aisle and trying to come up with a solution to that problem. And so with that being said, Mr. Chair, I would like to move Amendment L046 and have it be properly displayed.
Amendment L046 has been moved and is now properly displayed. To the amendment, Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what this amendment does is we have struck the ASIP language from the bill and that requirement of the state to follow the ASIP schedule. We have updated the schedule to include 3 of the 5 immunizations that were on that schedule, which is hepatitis A, rotavirus, and the meningococcal immunizations. But the ASIP schedule is stricken, and so we will have the same process that we currently have through the Board of Health if any future immunizations want to be added to the schedule. And so with that being said, I would ask for an aye vote, please.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L046? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I do appreciate that the ASIP pieces has been removed, I do have concerns, obviously, about the 3 vaccinations that this does address. Can you speak to, Representative Mullica, what the impact is of HPV, what the impact is of the flu vaccination, if there is anything that, I understand we pulled it from ASIP, ASIP had those, but if you could speak a little bit to that piece, that would be helpful.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so HPV and the flu vaccine were part of the current ASIP schedule. We chose not to include those in on updating the schedule because one is seasonal and the other one is not a communicable disease that is necessarily caught in the environment or through airborne or any other means like that. It's through a different form, and so that's why we chose to leave those 2 out from the schedule.
Further discussion, Representative Geithner.
Thank you for that, Representative Mullica, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and just for further clarification, I think there was some discussions that we had regarding the Administrative Procedural Act and how that would leave this in place in terms of the piece where, so if we don't have ASIP, if CDPHE needs to amend further what vaccinations children would be required, whether the list was to grow or to shrink, I believe we have a process in place, the administration or the Administrative Process Act. If you could just speak a little bit to that.
President Malka.
So, yeah, the process with this amendment, that process will not be changing in regards to the Board of Health choosing that. I don't know if you're speaking to potentially the piece in the bill right after this that has CDPHE being able to adapt the timeline if there is a immunization added to the schedule for CDPHE to be able to work on the timeline.
Right. No. I think my
you gotta
discussion.
wait for me to recognize you, Representative Geithner. I know you're really excited at 12:25 a.m. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the piece I was getting at was simply 2016, for instance, there was a debate around a vaccine. The administrative process that we have allowed for a stakeholder group to be formed. I think there was about 25 members made up of different people across the community. And so they met, they gave recommendations to CDPHE. CDPHE then went and acted on that. And that's what the piece I'm getting at. That this does not remove that process, that process is still honored in statute, and that 1312 does not impact that.
Representative Malka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Geithner, that's my understanding that the process is not changing with this bill, that we're staying status quo in regards to that process with what this amendment is doing.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Mollica.
All right, further discussion on Amendment L046, Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do appreciate the sponsors' willingness to work with us and understand the concern that we have with throwing the State Board of Health and members of the Board of Health decision-making process away was not necessarily what we wanted in Colorado. So this amendment does do some very good things because we're not following the federal guidelines, but I think it does require, it doesn't recommend, it requires 3 additional vaccinations. Now, this is something that some parents are already getting. I think there are doctors that recommend this. Certain vaccinations. I know my children have had some of these vaccinations, but once again, it is in a debate where we don't really like the bill and we think it's overreaching to add 3 additional vaccinations onto what we currently do that impact all children in the state of Colorado is, I think, a little bit concerning. And so I'll just keep talking. And one of the reasons it's concerning is I actually Googled the code of the Patient's Bill of Rights in Colorado. And this is a code of Colorado regulations. And it's in law. And it's the Patient's Rights Policy. And it mentions that you can refuse any drug, give informed consent, be free of coercion, confidentiality of medical records, which I think is some of the concern that this would be shared in the tracking. And this is in law, and I think a lot of people put a lot of thought into this and really had this concept that you would give your consent prior to being included in treatment. That sounds like something that is good. And the heavy-handedness of mandates and requirements are of a concern because this is not what we usually give. I put a list up previously of what ACIP required, the federal program, and how many more vaccinations that would include in what we currently do in the current vaccination records. And that is something that our Board of Health has not seen necessary to do in an environment where we haven't had those epidemics, and our state Board of Health has not seen an issue with adding additional vaccines to the already pretty heavy schedule. And so I do want to thank the sponsor for helping us work through this, and I'll just have to listen to some other testimony before I decide if I'm going to support this amendment.
Mr. Manuria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Representative Mollica for this amendment. Some of the concerns we had is the bill as written actually did tie us directly to the ACIP schedule, and the ACIP schedule can obviously add vaccines and we wouldn't know, and that's not common throughout no other state that has similar laws has that. So what this does, obviously not perfect. If I were writing the bill, not what I would write, but I think it was a good compromise by the sponsor. It says that as of the effective date of this, all the immunizations on the CDPHE schedule are part of this, plus the 3 that are listed in this amendment are added too. So not all of the ACIP. ACIP would also, if we tied it directly to ACIP, we'd also be adding the HPV and there's one other one, the influenza. We'd be adding that too. So we didn't add that in this amendment. This amendment does not add that, but it does freeze that so that in statute, these are the vaccines that we are talking about. No more can be added by some different regulatory process. They would actually have to come to us. I like this because we're not abdicating our role to some other government agency or some other federal agency that can just change lists and change, quite frankly, if we're trying to get actual vaccine rates, if we're changing them as we go, we're never going to get accurate data. So this actually freezes this so we can get accurate data on these immunizations over an accurate period of time, and they're not changing on a yearly basis. And we're not, again, tied to that ACIP schedule that is a federal government entity that can change it without any of us having any input at all. And so I do think this was a good faith amendment, and I do appreciate it.
President Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually do have a question for the sponsor, and I know he's working right now, but I need to ask about the rotavirus requirement in the amendment. I'm sorry, to the sponsor. Since the name of the bill is modernizing immunization requirements for school entry to improve vaccination rates, I just wanted to ask about the rotavirus addition in this amendment, which, thank you for the amendment. I'm really glad that the ACIP requirements are being dropped. But when I just trying to figure out rotavirus, I wasn't familiar with it. It said that it's given at 2, 4, and 6 months. And it looks like this bill is more interested in the school age, in school entry and in raising those rates. And so since these vaccines are given by 6 months, there might be children that are delayed for whatever reason, for medical reasons or whatever reason, but then they're caught up at school. So I'm just curious about why rotavirus, since it's a bigger problem for infants, why we're dealing with this in a school bill. So I just wanted to know about that. Thank you.
Representative Mullica to the rotavirus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Ransom, for the question. Rotavirus is actually not an immunization that you can catch up on. It's an immunization that has to be given at the specific times that are stated. The ultimate goal, obviously, of this bill, like we said, is to have safer, to have our students be safer. And so And so the goal is that this rotavirus will create that and protect children. But if a child does not receive that, or an infant does not receive the rotavirus, there's no catching up. And so essentially it falls off of the schedule to go into school because it's not possible to catch up. And so, but this bill does focus on trying to make sure our students are safer and healthier. And so that's why that immunization was included on the schedule.
Further discussion on Amendment L046? Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L046, the question before the body is the passage of Amendment L046. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. L046 passes. Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During this process, we've also heard issues around compelled speech, and we've heard that there are some parents that are concerned that they would potentially have to sign a form that's created by the CDPHE that would force them to admit that they're abusing their child, or just sign something that they don't agree with under duress. That's an issue that I wanted to address. I wanted to make sure that that we don't have residents signing something that they disagree with or under duress. It doesn't accomplish any goals that we're trying to do for this bill. It doesn't, improve our immunization rates to have them sign that. And so that's part of this. With that being said, Mr. Chair, I would like to move Amendment L039.
Sounds like a good idea. L039 has been moved.
And properly
displayed. Is
properly displayed.
Almost now properly displayed to the amendment. Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment specifically says that the forms developed by the CDPHE must be limited to the request for information related to collecting data pertaining to an exemption. And that includes demographic information, but not including social security number, which is something that, in talking to my colleagues on the right here, that we met about and agreed upon, school information, immunization information, type of exemption claimed. And then further below, it just kind of goes into the medical and non-medical exemptions. And so that's what this piece of the bill does, or this piece of the amendment does, is really try to address that compelled speech and really just focus on what we wanted to focus on, which is making sure that we were getting the information on the amendment. And so with that being said, Mr. Chair, I would like to move a substitute amendment to this amendment, L042, and have it properly displayed, please. Amendment to the amendment.
Okay. There is an amendment to Amendment L039. That is Amendment L042. L042, an amendment to L039, has been moved and is now properly displayed. Representative Mullica, please tell us a little bit about Amendment L042.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a lot of stakeholding work, really trying to address the problems that we're hearing. And basically what this part does is it takes Amendment L039, but also makes sure that any forms that are being turned in either by your physician or to your physician, by your physician, or the CDPHE, that once those forms are completed and the information is entered, that they are properly destroyed. Again, this was a lot of hard work that went into these amendments, some long meetings to try to come up with these compromises to address some of these concerns. And with that being said, I would ask for an aye vote.
To the amendment, Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I'd like to ask the sponsor a couple of questions about the amendments. And so I like the idea of the documents being destroyed, but the information goes into a database or tracking system. So is there any descriptive information in the database currently? I mean, I know we got rid of the Social Security and the thumbprint and the, all of that, but is this aggregate data that you would track immunizations, like in this area, in this school, you have 95% vaccinations, and so maybe you want 100%, so you might do some incentives like gift cards or something. No, I'm just joking. But is it aggregate like you would the public health department does track other diseases. If there's an outbreak of hepatitis A, or I know in the situation of West Nile virus years ago, it was a pretty significant issue in Colorado, and they tracked outbreak, but not by name, and not like by personal identification. They tracked it by aggregate data. So I like the idea of the forms being destroyed, but it's still, information is still going to go into a tracking system. And so I'm wondering if this is I'm just a little confused about the substitute amendment. What will actually be in the form that is destroyed, and what will be anything that's not aggregate, something personally identifiable that is going to go into that system. Name, date of birth, address. Thank you.
All right, and just as a clarification, this is not a substitute amendment, but an amendment to Amendment L039, but we are on Amendment L042, the amendment to the amendment. Representative Mullica to Amendment L042.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Beckman, for the question. And so we focused on this piece of the bill to obviously be the compelled speech, and then the destroying of the documents once they were deemed unnecessary, or once everything was done to get them in the system. Now it is explicit in the bill to have your information opted out of the SIS information and have it just be aggregate data. With that being said, it's my understanding that just like at the schools, they currently hold that information, and if there's an emergency, that information can be accessed if there's an outbreak or something. If you choose to opt out of your information being in SIS, so school nurses, for example, can search in SIS for immunization information. If you choose to opt out, your information won't be accessible. It'll go into what is deemed like an inaccessible database, and only accessed if there is an emergency. And so there is the opt out in there, and that's explicitly clear in the bill. But this amendment specifically talks to the language that is on the form to make sure that it's not compelled speech, that there's not any signing under duress, specifically stating what should be on the form, and then making sure that once that form lives its life and they get everything they need from it, that it is destroyed.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I think, for me, I think it goes back to, and probably we've been circling around this issue. It's great that the documents are going to be destroyed. Thank you. But the confidentiality of the medical records is still concerning, and I'm still not clear on what kind of information is that document going to have, and is that whatever is in that tracking system, which to me a tracking system should be aggregate data. Data system, data sharing, where you have HIPAA protections is a different thing than this. There's no HIPAA protection here. There's no protection under the public school medical records protections either. This is public health, which usually in public health, we don't document names and things. It's public health. It's aggregate data with, so you can know there's a cluster of hepatitis A, or there's a outbreak of the flu. When they're looking at the outbreak of the flu, they don't say John, Mary, Bill, and Mike have the flu here. That's not what the public health department does. They do aggregate data. They say there's a cluster of outbreaks of flu. And so the protection of the confidentiality of medical records, there's a whole bunch of issues of, is this correlable? Do people have access to this data? Are they going to use it specifically to disclose this data if there is an outbreak, and to identify people that don't have immunizations? And so the confidentiality of those records is still a concern, because it's public health. It's not a doctor. It's not a medical professional. Public health is, disease control, and it's not disease control by individuals. It's community disease control. So if I could just know what's going to be on that form, is it name, birthday, what is going to be? Can I just go in and say, I want to that my child's name is John Doe, and I would like him to, I'd like to get an exemption for my vaccinations, and here's my forms. So what's in the tracking system is my question.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so Representative Beckman, it specifically states the demographic information. I'm not quite sure how this form could be necessarily turned in anonymously. And so that's what we specifically stated that we wanted to do with this, is list out the information that would be on the form, which is there, but make sure that there was no compelled speech. That is what we were trying to solve with this amendment, was the compelled speech, and making sure that no one was signing a form under duress stating something that they may disagree with. And so that was the intent of this amendment.
President Beckman.
Thank you, Representative Mullica. Actually, that helps a lot. I didn't see demographic information. And actually, the way the amendment is written, it seems like personal information, I mean, it would be on the form, but it's not collected in the tracking system if you opt out. Okay, thank you very much for this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this is a question for the bill sponsor, especially since it's his amendment to the amendment. I guess my question was on the line 10 part, actually line 9 going to line 10, where it starts out talking about destroyed as soon as reasonably practicable. I was wondering if you could provide a little bit more information. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's okay. He's a popular amendment sponsor
Right.
here, so
Representative
we'll
Mulligan,
let
I'm
you
sorry.
restate the question. Representative Williams.
Yes, absolutely. So line 9 going to line 10, where it talks about the destruction as soon as reasonably practical. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit why it seems a bit open-ended to me, but I just wanted to learn a little bit more your thinking on that language specifically.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Williams, for the question. And so I think that the thought process on it is that you have to be conscious of what you're putting into statute. And so that I don't think it's appropriate to say necessarily to have the expectation that the form be immediately destroyed when they come in, or putting a time frame of the form needs to be destroyed in 1 week or 2 weeks. I think that there needs to be some leeway in there for the local public health agencies or whatever entity would be destroying the form to destroy the form. And I think that wording of reasonably practicable is as the amendment says, reasonable. And so I didn't think it was appropriate to really list out specific dates or time frames in there. And I thought that this was reasonable, especially being that it's going to be in statute.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think that makes sense. It was just my curiosity on that. Just one follow-up, if you may, or if you would please answer. When you spoke to any of the stakeholders, the departments, or any of the agencies that would be handling the situation, did they provide any sort of time frame at all, or is this? Well, I'll just ask that question.
President Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Williams. No time frame was provided. The process was obviously, we reached out to CDPHE to see if this was a process that they could perform, and they agreed that it was something that they could do, and it was a reasonable ask to make sure that information was being protected and destroyed in a reasonable, practicable time frame. And so they agreed with it. There was no timeline discussion, though, if that answers your question.
Further questions on Amendment L042 and Amendment to L039? Seeing no further questions, Amendment L042, the question before the body is the adoption of Amendment L042. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. L042 passes. We are back to the underlying amendment L039 as amended. Is there any further discussion on L039 as amended? Representative Liston.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just had a question. Does this concern any part of the database?
Representative Mullica.
Sorry, what do I need to
Yeah, I'm just curious, Representative Mullica. I haven't had a chance to read over the whole amendment. Is there anything on here about the database? Because I have a question about the database or not on this amendment.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Liston. This amendment doesn't have to do with anything about the database. It has to do with the form that would be developed by CDPHE. Just make sure there's no compelled speech on that form.
I'll ask you later then. Thank you.
All right. Further questions on Amendment L039 as amended or discussion? Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I did want to thank the sponsor for understanding our qualms and concerns about the compelled speech issue. I know that was one of the items that I heard a lot from emails that I was getting. And I know one thing that when I was just looking at the whole issue of compelled speech, I wanted to, again, thank the sponsor for adding this portion of it, because without the compelled speech being removed from the form, the First Amendment, which is what it's based on, wouldn't be completely effective. As recently as 2006, the Supreme Court held in Rumsfeld versus Forum for Academic and Institutional Rights that some of the court's leading First Amendment precedents have established the principle that freedom of speech prohibits the government from telling people what they must say. So I know the forms that we saw several years ago when a similar bill was run included some compelled speech that I know parents were very, very opposed to. So I'm grateful. Again, I'm grateful that that part was removed. So I did have a question, though, about the form, one of which I know that the amendment does say that the information listed here, including but not limited to, but I know a couple of the things I was curious about was there isn't a place at all, or there isn't a requirement at all for even a signature from the parent or guardian, and I didn't know if that was something that was even going to be required. So I thought I would ask that question. The other thing, and I don't know if this is, since they'll be interacting with the health department, I know that this bill hasn't passed yet, but one of the issues that I know somebody brought up to me is that the current bill that would automatically register people to vote, I didn't know if this form would generate an automatic voter registration for people that may not want that. So that and then the signature piece were the two questions I had on this.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before I get into that, I just want to make sure that you know that it's a true honor to serve with you. And so thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Yesterday, it is an honor to serve with you as well.
And thank you, Representative Ransom, for the question. It's an honor to serve with you as well. So the parent signature, I'll have to go back through the bill to see if there's anything. I don't remember there being anything around a parent signature on the form that I could find. But I want to double check that. In regards to automatic voter registration, I don't know how that would even happen or there's any intent there. This would be something completely separate from any of that. And so to be honest with you, I wouldn't even imagine where to start on how they could fit together. And so I hope that answers your question a little bit. Yeah, and I just can't even envision or imagine how they do. And so, but I would like to go back through the bill just to check on the signature piece for you too. So, okay, thank you.
All right, sounds great. Any further discussion on Amendment L039 as amended? Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this amendment is a result of a lot of hours of conversation, so I do want to recognize that Representative Malka, working with myself and Representative Geithner, Representative Beckman, and Neville, I particularly like the idea of the parents it being explicit in law that they are be able to either check a box or something to indicate they do not want their information in that particular database. It's not exactly where I want it to be, but it certainly makes the bill better. There is just a quick question, because I'm not 100% familiar with all these laws, but one of the questions that has come up to me in some discussions with some parents is their understanding is that FERPA already allows for schools to share with CDPHE PII in the case of a health or safety event. Would that conflict with that federal privacy program at all, this particular bill?
Representative Mullica, if you'd like to take a stab at that one.
Can you just clarify? I don't understand the question.
Well, Representative Sane, would you like to restate the question?
Sure. So we were talking about making sure that one of the concerns that the sponsors gave to me was the fact that if there is some kind of outbreak, the idea behind any kind of tracking system would be that schools could alert parents to say, look, we have an outbreak and we believe that your child isn't vaccinated, we're letting you know. I think that's one of the ideas, right? One of the concerns that was just brought up to me in the last couple hours was some parents' understanding is FERPA already allows for schools to give a feedback to CDPHE with personally identified information in an event of a health or safety event like an outbreak. I just want to make sure we're not, with this new state law, going to be conflicting with that.
President Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Sane, for clarifying that. So with this new law, by having this information turned in directly to either your local public health department or the CDPHE, FERPA will not apply because FERPA has to do with the schools, and so the schools are not in that equation, so it won't apply because all of that information just goes directly to your local public health department or CDPHE. FERPA is only when the school has that information, and the school has to protect that information.
Further discussion on Amendment 039 as amended. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, there's some good stuff in L039, but I think it could be better. And I think the way that we make that better is through Amendment L050, which I move and ask that it be properly displayed.
So L050, is this a substituted amendment, an amendment to the amended amendment? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be an amendment to the amendment.
All right, L050 has been moved and is now properly displayed to the amendment. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So members, what this does is this basically does a bit of what I tried to do in the strike below that I offered. And what it says that any forms that may be developed by CDPHE would not be able to request or include any personally identifiable information. Members, I think that this piece is absolutely critical. It is not uncommon that we see databases compromised. I know I've served in the United States Army for 14 years, and heck, DOD can't even keep my information secure. It's been compromised probably 4 or 5 times in my 14 years. And so I believe that this is a good way that we can further protect students, protect parents, protect families, so that that personally identifiable information is not made available, or is not compromised in any capacity, should it be collected and stored in some sort of a database somewhere. And so members, I urge support for Amendment L050.
Representative Mullica.
Did you want to speak to it, Pelton?
Well, we'll go with Representative Pelton first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. the people I've been in contact with want the database gone, period. There are criminals that information is protected more so than what our children's immunization records would be. So short of just completely doing away with the database, which would be the preferable outcome, this amendment is something that I think we could live with. It's not perfect, but it takes away the names, any identifiable information that I think we could live to fight another day. So short of doing away with the database, I stand in full support of this amendment.
To the amendment, for the discussion, Representative Malika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand what Representative Geithner is trying to get at. But this system has been around for 10 plus years. Remember, it's a secure system protected by the government. There's no selling of the information. Actually, if you look at the statute 25.4.2403, subsection 3, it specifically talks about what happens if this information is misused and the penalties and the criminal penalties, the civil penalties that happen. And so I feel confident in our state government and in the CDPHE to protect this information. I still struggle even trying to figure out how basically an anonymous form would be turned in without any name. And I've had that discussion with members on this side. And so with that being said, I would ask for a no vote on this amendment, members.
Further discussion on Amendment L050, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I rise in support for this amendment to the amendment. I think it's absolutely reasonable that we exclude date of birth, name, social security, anything that's personally identifying an individual. While I also have great confidence in the systems that our government has in place to ensure that there are no issues that could arise here, they're not 100% secure. There have been in the past, and you'll forgive me because it's a bit late, I don't have the specific instance, but there has been issues in the past where there were data breaches with some of our, at least one of our agencies. And that's problematic, especially if we have this kind of information in place. We don't want to put anyone in harm's way, especially in this day and age where you see an uptick in cyber-related crimes. So this is, I would say, a friendly thing to do. It still doesn't exclude the information that I believe the bill sponsor is looking for. It just simply says, hey, we're not going to have anything in the system related to specific information to that person's identity. And that's reasonable and I think justified in this instance. So I would ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
Further discussion on Amendment L050, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I can appreciate that people have confidence in government databases and the security that they provide, I absolutely do not. And so I think this is a good way to go ahead and tighten that up so that the information can't be compromised. And while I can appreciate in statute that there are parameters as to what can be done to hold someone liable, if someone breaks into the system and it is not due to some sort of negligence on a CDPHE employee or other, I also recognize there are statutes that could go after an individual if they were ever identified that may have hacked into the system. Not putting it into the system to begin with solves all those problems. This is a critical piece to help prevent information that is private and sensitive due to identity and a whole bunch of other things that could be used to compromise financials and stuff in the future. But additionally, when we're talking about exemptions to vaccinations and having record of that, it is not uncommon that families become targeted because they are seen as a risk to their community, which is completely unfair. And so in my mind, if we don't allow this information to be stored and placed in the government's hands, which, like I said, I don't trust, then I think we are ensuring that we are safeguarding each and every one of these families when we are compelling them to be entered in to a database. So I would urge support for L050. I think we need to go the extra mile because in this body, as policymakers, first we do no harm. And the only way first we do no harm is that we don't expose these families to their information being compromised or being targeted if the information was to somehow get out. And so I would urge strong support for L50, and let's protect families, let's protect personally identifiable information, and adopt this amendment to the amendment.
Further discussion, Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, members, this Amendment 39, which this Amendment 50 is trying to amend, specifically was addressing to try to prevent compelled speech. And I feel like we've addressed that in this amendment. I also want to make one other point, members. Since the inception of SIS, there's been no breach of that database. There's been no breach or no issues that information's been lost or sold or stolen. And so there's nothing that's happened with that database that shows that it's at risk or that or that they're not handling it appropriately or respecting people's information. And so with that being said, I would again ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me clarify why we're asking for this particular amendment at this time. So without this amendment, this makes two classes of citizens. So parents who choose to vaccinate on the regular schedule get to retain their FERPA rights. But those who do not do the schedule, even if they have to miss one vaccine for whatever reason, and there's many reasons not to vaccinate a child on a schedule. If they're very sick, a doctor will say, do not do vaccinations right now. Come back later and do that, right? So if a parent decides not to vaccinate their child, they lose their FERPA rights. So I want to rewind and say that again. Parents who choose to follow the Colorado vaccine schedule keep their FERPA rights because they do not turn their paperwork into CDPHE. But a parent who misses a vaccine is essentially surrendering their FERPA rights by turning that paperwork in. So that's why, yes. So I just want to make sure we're retaining what you want to do with this bill, which is if there is some kind of outbreak, I think we have that covered under FERPA now, if it pertains to schools, because that's really the idea of the bill. If there's an event right now that does allow those schools to report to CDPHE that information at that time when it's needed. So this is why we're asking for this particular amendment. Now that I kind of understand what's going on, we don't want to create two classes of citizens, so that's why this is important. I think this will get to the heart of what you're trying to do.
For discussion, Representative Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe this is the time where I was going to ask Representative Mullica, since we're talking about the database, I was just wondering, here in the fiscal note, it says that there's no appropriation required. So with all the talk about the database, is there going to be a need for any type of appropriation, or is this database up and running, or is it going to need extra funding? I honestly don't know, so I'm just trying to find out if you could elucidate us.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Liston, for the question. I obviously didn't write the fiscal note, but I do know that the system is already in place. We already have the SIS database in place. And it's my understanding that the fiscal analyst reached out to the departments that this bill would affect, and the response back was that they were able to accomplish what this bill was trying to do without a fiscal note. I wasn't in the room or anything when that was going on, but that's my understanding.
I will accept your answer for now. Thank you.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I strongly urge a yes vote on this amendment. I think if there's a no vote, I think we're going to get down to the real reason for this bill. I think it's about gathering information to find out who's not vaccinating. It's not about getting kids vaccinated. It is about finding out who isn't following the government's rules. So I strongly urge a yes vote to keep that from happening in our state.
Representative Williams. Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
And good morning, members. So my question, while we're on the database topic, I seem to remember, probably was in 2014, 2015, that there was a data breach. I think it was an issue of a lost computer or a jump drive, and it was state employees' data, and we got emails and were advised how to handle that situation. And I think it was, if not all state employees, a huge chunk of state employees. So I was wondering if the bill sponsor would be able to help us out with understanding how that data is secured. Is there, are you familiar with what the level of security or encryption would be to protect that data? It's a tough question, but I think it's relevant.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I'm not an IT analyst. It's not my background. I'm a nurse. I do know that I work in a hospital, and we fall under the HIPAA guidelines. It's my understanding that CDPHE also falls under the HIPAA guidelines, and so they'll have the same requirements that the hospitals do and other medical providers do to protect that information through those HIPAA guidelines, and that information has the same protections, because I know that the concern is that that by not going through the schools, we lose the FERPA protections, but we still have HIPAA protections through the CDPHE. As far as kind of the intricate details about kind of the IT stuff, I don't have the answers to that. I do know that to meet the HIPAA guidelines, it has to be significant protection, though. The electronic database or the electronic health records, it has to be a significant protection. I just don't know the intricate details.
And if the asker of the question is interested, there's a 36-page document that I'm happy to share via our Wi-Fi, which is completely unsecure, to go to your email. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I renew my call to vote yes on this. And I want to thank Representative Humphrey for helping me pin down exactly the event, or at least get a little bit more specified to what happened. He said 2014, 2015 timeframe that there was a data breach compromising the information from state employees. And I say that not because it's going to happen routinely or it's going to happen often, but the point that I think is being made here is that this information is never going to be 100% secure. So I guess my question, and I would ask the bill sponsor to help me understand this. Is there, with respect to the personally identifiable information, is there a reason why we would need the name and date of birth information? Is there a reason why we can't adopt this that would preclude that information?
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Williams. We've had significant conversations in the stakeholding and the meetings with Representative Geithner. The department needs to collect a certain amount of information, because if there is an emergency, they need to be able to access that. Even if they opt out, there will be an inaccessible part of the database that can be accessible in case of an emergency. And I think that the logistics of it, I just don't know how you turn in an anonymous form. And so I don't think it's too burdensome to ask for this information, and if parents don't want that information to be in the database, then it's explicitly clear that they can opt out of that information and just have it be the aggregate data. And then we also, with this amendment that the amendment to the amendment, we've made sure to address that those documents will be destroyed in a reasonable amount of time, which address some of the concerns that there would be outstanding information out there that would be accessible. And so I feel like this is fair, what we're proposing, and addressing the issue. but there needs to be a certain amount of information on the form.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I did spend some time as a director in the Department of Human Services, I was well aware of some data sharing agreements that I was very concerned about with outside organizations, with data from food stamp applicants and others, where really personal information was shared for nonprofits to do outreach. I just found on the website, and I think everyone would find this very interesting, a memorandum of understanding between Prevention Service Division, Nutrition Service Branch, Colorado WIC, which is kind of a subset of SNAP, and Disease Control and Environmental Division, Colorado Immunization Section. And it talks here about CIS, the Colorado Immunization Sector's mission is to reduce vaccine preventable diseases through development and implementation of programs designed to increase and maintain vaccination coverage, and the Colorado WIC program that supplies specific nutritions. This is a data sharing agreement. So this is used so that the WIC participants, that information collected during WIC visits will be shared with CIS, and provide the information to CIS every 2 weeks via the agreed upon method. So we do have data agreements with CIS and WIC currently, data sharing agreements, and I think that that is of concern. Data sharing agreements are pretty normal. Yeah, I think everyone would be surprised how often that these departments sign up to do data sharing agreements with organizations. And even though these are both government organizations, it is still an issue that once this, in this, data elements provided, date of birth, last name, first name, middle name, gender, race, I mean, it goes on and on and on with information that is shared. And so there is some cross-referencing. I know that there are even actually mailers that are done by state departments to inform people if there's a delay in some critical legislation at the federal level, that they have access to those who receive benefits and can send notices out. But this is two government organizations where this information is being shared. So I don't know how we can say that we can keep this information private when the organizations that have this information are sharing it between the Department of Public Health and Environment and WIC. I think that there's some concerns there, and maybe we need to write that into the amendment, that there will be no data sharing in between CDPHE or USDA or other organizations.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not quite sure what we can do to address anything with WIC. I do know that specifically in this bill and in statute, you can opt your information out. And so if you do not want your information to be in CIS, it does not have to be in CIS, or if you don't want your child's information to be in CIS, it does not have to be in CIS. And so if it's not in the database, there's no way to share it. And so I think that I don't know any other way to say it. It's explicitly clear in the bill, though, that you can opt your information out.
Further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L050, the question before the body is the adoption of L050 as an amendment to L039. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no? No. L050 fails. We are back to the underlying amendment. To the underlying amendment, is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion on L039, all those in favor of L039 as amended signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. L039 passes. Back to the bill. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1312? Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to have a little bit more discussion. And again, I appreciate all the work that's been done on the underlying amendment. But it seems like we are adding another process that's unnecessary. So I'm still scratching my head just a little bit on this. If the stated concern is, then we ensure if there's some kind of outbreak, whether it's measles, Ebola, that's kind of far-fetched, or something else. The stated intent that was given to me was we want to make sure that those folks who don't have those protections by being vaccinated, that their school can reach out to them and let them know. The problem I see right now is, even with these amendments that have been added, is we are creating two classes of citizens. One that's protected by FERPA and one that's not protected. If they so choose not to undergo the Colorado schedule for whatever reason. And that could be because they see a risk with a certain vaccine and choose not to use that vaccination, or a child cannot receive vaccinations for whatever reason. And we've gone over those reasons ad nauseum, medical-wise, religious-wise, personal exemption-wise, but I think that's important to note, that I know a lot of parents don't want to give up that for protection. They're not entirely convinced that CDPHE is the best place to store their information where it'll be safe. And why do that when there's already a system in place to protect information at schools? So that's the question we're asking. We're probably going to have a little bit more discussion on that particular issue because it is so very important to our parents. I was really hoping that last amendment would pass, and that would probably resolve a lot of the concerns we have. But thank you for listening, and we'll continue working.
All right. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1312? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this bill, like so many others, has very passionate and emotional sides. You have one side that's very passionate about ensuring that public safety is upheld. You have another side saying that they care about public safety as well, but ultimately it's their children and it should be their choice because there is that potential for risk involved. And from what I've seen, and I'm sure all of us have seen as well, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of emails that I've received ever since talk about this particular issue was brought up a few months back. And I think that kind of just shows you that even with the good work that we've seen between Representative Geithner, Sane, and Mullica, there's still some heartache about this bill because it is upending the status quo. It is upending what people are used to, and I think that as we move forward, we need to be mindful and cognizant about that. And ultimately, I think this is a parental rights issue, and I think we need to be at every step of the way during this debate. We need to be looking for scenarios where we're going to be injecting consent, and there is plenty of consent, even involved in the products that in the product that this bill is presenting. But I think more can be done. And so, with that, members, I move Amendment L048, and I ask that it be displayed.
Amendment L048 has been moved and is properly displayed. To the amendment, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what this amendment would do is it would refer it to the people for a vote. I think ultimately we should be asking the parents and the voters of our state who care about their children more than anyone else, we should be asking them ultimately for their permission. If it's in fact a public safety issue, I think most parents might agree with Representative Mullica and pass it. I mean, after all, I think you'll find that the vast majority of individuals actually do vaccinate their children, and they're okay with it. And And so this might actually pass if it were sent to the people. And I would feel more comfortable about this bill if we're asking parents about what they want to do. And if we ask them at the ballot box, I think that helps out greatly. So I really feel strongly about this. This is a place where we care about consent. At least we say we care about consent. And if we truly do care about the will of the people, if we care about consent and making sure that we're doing right by them, then let's go ahead and put it on the ballot and ask people to vote on it. So please vote yes.
To the amendment, Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Williams, for taking the time to bring this amendment. Members, I would ask for a no vote. We were sent down here to do a job. We were elected to do a job, and that's what we're doing. That's why I came down here. It's why I ran, is to represent my community and represent the perspective that I bring with me as an emergency room nurse and as a dad. I think that, you know, obviously as a representative, you can vote any way you want on this bill, but we were brought down here to do a job, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm trying to do in passing this legislation. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is only my first year here, but it seems like a lot of these bills this year have the safety clause on them. We aren't in the middle of a huge outbreak, an epidemic. Let's send this to the people. It's their rights, their bodies. Let's send it to the people, see what they have to say. So I appreciate this amendment, Representative Williams.
Representative Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we were sitting down here to do a job, and we have already had a couple of bills where we are sending something to the vote of the people. That's one of the jobs that we do, if something should go to the vote of the people. This is important enough that we should let the voters vote on this. Please vote for this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment, L048. Representative Williams. Mr. Assistant Minority Leader.
Hey, Mr. Chair, this bill approaches a very fundamental right, which are parental rights, and before we impede government control into those parental rights, I think it would just make sense to go to the vote of the people, give the people a choice. So I ask for a yes vote.
For the discussion on amendment L048, Representative Buck.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good morning.
Folks, as you know, I have the best district. I truly believe that. And it's a lot of it is because I don't really hear that much, which maybe hopefully I can take as I'm doing the job that I should be doing. But this bill has been really lighting up my emails, my phones, and they are absolutely up in arms that this bill is not what they want. And so I think we can all agree we have received plenty of emails. We have received plenty of phone calls. We've received plenty of texts. So I ask something that is so, I would say, egregious to my district, that we would take this to the people and allow them the opportunity. So please, I do ask that you support this amendment. Thank you.
For the discussion on amendment L048, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, Representative Mullica is correct. We were sent here to do a job. But this issue, again, touches on so many facets of our communities and our society, and I got to tell you, I've certainly been hearing from my district, but I've been hearing statewide from individuals all across the state, and they're certainly not happy about this. And I can tell you that many individuals would disagrey with Representative Mullica's assessment that he should be doing this, he should be passing this through. I think mostly everyone that has contacted me doesn't want this to begin with, and I think it's only appropriate that we allow them the ability to vote on it. After all, it's their children. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, no one cares about my child more than me and my wife. And that's true for everyone else. You care about your children more than anyone else does. And so, you know, parental rights is I think ultimately what's at stake here. And if we're going to make this kind of change in our legal framework, then we should do, I think, what's right and ask them. We should ask permission. We should absolutely give parents and the voters the opportunity to weigh in on this decision. It's, you know, the only appropriate thing to do. You know, I had promised my favorite constituent, my wife, because she certainly had some issues with this bill, and she certainly doesn't take away any of the potential benefits that vaccines have, but she asked me to do a little bit of this, and it is related to the amendment, Mr. Chair. But she sent me the vaccine insert for the MMR vaccine, and she wanted me to point out a few things which cause concern for some parents. And you'll have to forgive me because I am not a doctor. My Latin's not all that well pronounced. But there are various risks associated with vaccinations. One of them is death. I will freely admit, even in the insert, it says it's rare, right? Then you have potential nerve deafness. Then there's a risk here of Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Have no idea what that is, but it sounds like it's pretty bad according to this insert right here. Cases of aseptic meningitis. There have been reports of subacute, some long Latin word. It sounds terrible, members. The point, I'm not even going to attempt to read this because I'm not qualified to read this. My point in this is that when parents read this, they have to do a sort of a risk-reward analysis, and there are parents out there that deeply feel that these risks that are in the inserts for these vaccines are going to potentially harm their children. And who are we to try and push these onto those parents in any small way? Who are we to nudge them into taking these vaccines or having their children take these vaccines? It shouldn't be our decision, which is why we should ultimately ask the people why we're doing this. Because with this risk should come the freedom and choice for individuals to make for their children. And I want to say that, you know, these risks are rare, or at least they've been reported to be rare. But nevertheless, there are parents out there that are uncomfortable given these risks. And we should honor them, we should honor their rights, and we should definitely honor the people, and we should let them have a say on this one. And so please vote yes for this amendment.
Further discussion on Amendment L048, Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you.
Good morning.
So I came down here to speak towards referring it to the people. So far this year, we've referred two measures to the people, one concerning TABOR, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and the other concerning online sports gaming. So to add a third is well within line of what we've already done this year. Plus, this is one of those issues that rises to the level where the amount of public interest that this bill has garnered by far surpasses anything that I have seen this legislative session, and quite frankly, to memory. And I do believe it would be appropriate to refer it to the people. I would like to point out some statistics that when this body refers a measure to the people, over 3/4 of the time, the people agree with us and go ahead and pass that measure. So there's definitely good odds that it will also pass, and perhaps we could bet on that as well. So once again, I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Further discussion on Amendment L048. Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L048, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. L048 fails. To the bill, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, during the 14 hours of debate that we heard, ASIP came up several times. In fact, we had testimony related to individuals that had medical exemptions and the concern that those existing medical exemptions would be nullified, void, somehow altered if there was any reference to ASIP in terms of how we look at those. And there are certain recommendations that ASIP has, specifically on specific recommendations that ASIP has when it comes to medical exemptions. And so the bill speaks to that on page 8 at line 9. And so I think there's a way that we can provide an element of certainty and clarity for that specific section. So members, I move L047 and ask that it be properly displayed.
L047 has been moved, is now properly displayed to the amendment. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is truly belts and suspenders. So what the bill says on page 8 is it says that the State Board of Health shall adopt by rule the medical exemption recommendations based on contradictions for vaccinations described by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. L047 says nothing in that section must be construed to prohibit or limit the authority of a licensed physician, physician assistant, authorized pursuant to section, and it's the same section that's referenced in the bill. Basically what it says is it says ACIP recommendations can work in terms of a medical exemption, or whatever that child's physician says in terms of a medical exemption should be honored. So it truly allows the decision to be made between the parent and the physician, and it doesn't rely solely on recommendations through ACIP. This is truly belts and suspenders. This amendment provides clarity for those that already have medical exemptions because it says that they will still be honored. It does not potentially impact, it would not, if not adopted, would not impact those parents. And I think that moving L047 forward with this body's support would be a good thing. It would allow us to honor parents in the decisions that they have made with their physician and not expose them to losing those medical exemptions.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I checked in with CDPHE on this. This bill will not cause people to lose their current medical exemptions. If they move districts, they still have the medical exemptions. And I think that the key word that we need to look at in this bill, members, is that it's recommendations. It's recommendations, it's not requirements. This is still in the purview of the doctor. If the doctor feels like there is something that falls outside of those recommendations, that a person or a child should be getting a medical exemption from an immunization, that's their purview. And members, I also want to make it clear that there is no denial authority given to CDPHE. And so it's the doctor's purview. If the doctor writes that medical exemption and submits a completed form to the CDPHE, there's no denial. That patient has a medical exemption. It's the doctor's purview. And so I want to make it clear, I believe that this amendment is unnecessary, and I would ask for a no vote.
Further discussion, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if it's not required and it is recommendations, then let's go ahead and add this and just add that level of clarity. You know, when it comes to medical treatments that our children require or medical procedures that would somehow be in the best interest of the child, let's make that clear. Let's not leave any type of vagueness in this so that people understand that they would not lose that medical exemption. And so that there wouldn't necessarily be that individual at CDPHE that doesn't interpret it the same way, that may have just come on board. Let's add that level of clarity. If it's just a recommendation, it's not a requirement, let's go ahead and add that level of clarity. We have nothing to lose by adopting this amendment. It is truly belts and suspenders. It may add a few lines to the overall bill, but it just adds further clarity, and adding clarity to policy is always a good thing. So again, I urge a yes vote on this amendment.
Grateful my fashion choices are influencing legislation. Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also speak in favor of this amendment. I hear so many times that decisions need to be made between a patient and their doctor. I've heard that over and over again. And I know what we were just told, that current medical exemptions won't go away. But at the same time, it doesn't hurt to define it. Folks, we're writing laws here. We're not writing recommendations. We're not writing suggestions. We're writing laws. And so our laws, words mean something. Words matter. And I think having this level of clarity will just make absolutely certain that if a doctor that's known a patient, that's known the child or the family for a long time, and they've been working with them, there might be subtle things that all combined together would create a reason to even delay. And remember, we're also talking that this law, this new system that we're looking at here, will put people into a non-compliance area if they just delay vaccines. And there are some very valid reasons to delay when someone has been sick for a long time, if a child has had a high fever for a while, if they're just getting over even strep throat, something like that. And I don't know all the medical reasons, but I would trust the doctors to come to the best conclusion for the medical exemption for a child that is there for the regularly scheduled shots that they're supposed to have at that visit. And so I think that having this level of clarity in this law that we are writing and that we are working on this evening, I think would just be to the benefit of everybody involved, including the bill sponsor. So with that, I urge an aye vote on the amendment, and thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment. Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I rise in support of this amendment. We haven't really had a good second reading debate until we've had a good belt and suspenders amendment like this. Here it is, and we're just simply making sure that if there is a medical condition and a doctor thinks that there should be an exemption, and yet the particular criteria as prescribed in the bill are not met to the letter, that can still happen. And I think that there can be really significant reactions subsequent to a immunization that could rise to that level. So I urge an aye vote on this amendment because I think, I think that this is the medically prudent thing to do, and let's respect the doctor and his opinion on the matter. Thank you.
Further discussion on the amendment. Representative, everyone point at each other. This is going well. Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I spoke earlier of my granddaughter. This amendment on there would allow her to have that medical exemption. And so I appreciate Representative Geithner for bringing this amendment. Right now they're going to homeschool, but if she wants to go into public school, she could use this as a medical exemption. So I appreciate the amendment. I'm going to support it. Vote yes.
Representative Titone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually had this amendment drafted before Representative Geithner did, and the bill drafter gave it to him because I didn't run it. So I am in support of this amendment. I think that, people want the assurance that the medical exemption is going to go to the medical exemption and they're going to get it. So why not just put that in the statute and make sure that it's there? That's how I view it. So I like this. Yes.
Further discussion on Amendment L047. Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L047, the question before the body is the passage of Amendment L047. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. L047 fails. Is there, back to the underlying bill, Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you may have noticed, I spilled some brown coffee on my blue shirt earlier, but I wore a tie that somehow brings it all together, so we're good. Hey, so one of the real concerns that came out in our 14-hour marathon last week was the concern about our kind of living in the 20th or maybe even the 19th century when it comes to filing exemptions. So the wording of the bill includes these words, I'll paraphrase slightly, on page 6, bottom of page 6. To claim the exemption, the parent must complete the certificate of a religious or personal belief exemption on a standardized form developed by the Department of Public Health and Environment and submit the certificate of a religious or personal belief exemption in person to the Department of Public Health and Environment or the applicable county, and so on. In person. Why on earth are we requiring that people submit their exemption form in person to drive there and so on? They can renew their driver's license online and many, many other things that we can do because this happens to be the 21st century and we have that thing called the internet and so on. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I move L037 and ask that it be properly displayed.
Amendment L037 has been moved and is now properly displayed. To the amendment, Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is very straightforward in that it strikes in person. It also subsequently will strike the word subsequent, as luck would have it. But the whole idea of this, again, is to not require that parents get in the car, drive to a government building, and worse than all that, have to go face the government bureaucrat to be browbeaten and intimidated and so on. It would be intimidating in the first place to go in and say, hey, I want to exempt my child from this vaccination for whatever their reason, very personal reason. It could be their religious beliefs. But they have to go to a government bureaucrat in person and get permission as if it's coming to Oz. So we ought not to be behaving that way as a government. So I ask for an aye vote on L037.
President Mullica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask for a no vote on this. There was a lot of work that went in this process. We wanted to make sure that we're formalizing the process and how you obtain that immunization exemption. Currently, you take that paperwork to your school, so you do turn it into a government entity. You do drive there to turn it into a government entity. We worked on this policy, this part of the bill, to make sure that it's only one time that we ask you to go in to turn this paperwork in to get your certificate of exemption. Any subsequent renewals are all done online. I don't feel like that's an unreasonable ask for you to go in person one time to get that certificate of exemption. You're already turning that paperwork in person just to a different government entity. We're just looking at formalizing the process. I would ask for a no vote, please.
For the discussion, Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard the conversation and that argument, Representative, a lot of times that I still scratch my head. Why, in formalizing the process, every online transaction that we do is a formalized process. I make purchases on Amazon constantly, and those are formalized processes. There's not a good reason to force that person to show up in the flesh. They could provide every bit of information from their iPhone, from their laptop, from their iPad. It's not simply one more hurdle for them to leap, but more than that, it's going to the government authority to get their permission, and I just, that's just the wrong attitude for this one. These parents are not feeling, they're feeling threatened in the first place. And so to have to come approach Oz is just too much to ask of them. And it's a simple change. It can happen online. I can have my own techies do that for free for you. I ask for an aye vote.
Further discussion on Amendment L037. Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand in support of this amendment. A lot of this has to do with impressions. What impression are we trying to give to our constituents, to our the citizens of Colorado, when we're asking them to go into a government building face to face, when we know there's so many ways this could be done online. This could be done by fax. This could be done by mail, but we want them to, in many cases, take off work, go down there, trouble them to turn in this document online and sign, I guess apparently sign this on, or sign this face to face. Why are we making it purposefully difficult on our citizens when we know there's so many easier means to do this? And that's what I think a lot of citizens are asking at this time. Why? When there's so many other ways, why are you asking us to do it the most difficult way? And that's something that I think we really need to answer to. Are we trying to make it more difficult on our citizens so they don't do it? We don't know. We don't know. But there are a lot of questions. I'm getting a lot of emails, a lot of calls on what's the true intention of this. I didn't write the bill. I don't know. We'd like to get some answers on that. But to make this difficult on our citizens is really a travesty. It seems like you have to go out of your way to get permission to make decisions for your kids, which is really concerning. Really concerning. That's why I stand in support of this amendment. Let's go ahead and make it easier on our citizens, not make it in a manner where they actually have to get in a car, drive, take off work. Let's start using technology. Let's look for easier ways to do this, so we're not giving this impression to our citizens that we're just trying to make it difficult on them. Remember, as I've said so many times up here, we're representing the interests of our citizens, the citizens of Colorado. I don't think they elected us to make it more difficult on them. So with that, I ask for an aye vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in full support of this amendment. I'm pretty used to going to government buildings, been going to them for years. People don't say I'm normal. These parents, some of them are intimidated by government buildings. And in today's electronic world, we can do everything with our phones, with tablets. We can scan documents, email them. I think this is a very good amendment, and I think it fits in today's world and in this situation, so I'd ask for a yes.
For the discussion, Representative Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I too rise in support of this amendment. It's interesting, members, the Secretary of State's office, if you go there, you can't even file a paper form anymore. Any election form, business forms, you name it. You go to the Secretary of State's website, and it's been that way, certainly under our former good Secretary of State, Wayne Williams. They made it a point to encourage everybody, and they've really moved that direction, that any form that you want to file is online, I remember a number of years ago, I kind of fought that. I thought, geez, I like to do it the old-fashioned way, the paper way. But now then, you know, you kind of get used to it. And like Representative Pelton said, with your phones and everything, and we're speaking about our voter registration, you can register online. And I believe, I'm pretty sure you can do that now. You can certainly change it. So I think this is fair and reasonable. One last point I would make is the other day we were debating a bill about people, about voting, about having voting boxes, et cetera, in police stations. And a lot of people, or some people, objected to that because they said it was intimidating. So if it's intimidating to have a voting box just to drop your ballot off in a police station, why, using that same logic, couldn't it be intimidating for a person to go in there and disclose personal information about, you know, immunization? So I think this is a fair and reasonable amendment. I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussions? Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think this is actually much more than a fair and reasonable amendment. I think it's an outstanding amendment. I think most of you know that I was a single mom with 4 kids under 10. Very suddenly, I became a single mom with no warning. And for me to have taken 4 kids down to a government building and tried to park and get inside with 4 children would have been a nightmare that would have lasted for hours. Whereas if I could have sent in a form or emailed in a form, I could have done it at night after the kids were in bed. But for me to get down during working hours to a place in a city-type area with 4 kids, including one that was still a baby, would have just been something I would have had to plan for a week just to get there. And so honestly, I think that allowing these forms to be filed on either at the local school, which is how it's done now, or if it is going to go to the health department, to be done online or via the mail system. The information is already there. We've been saying over and over again that the information is or should be available from the doctor's offices, and having to send, again, potentially a single parent, if some families have a mom and a dad and 1 kid, but there are plenty of families like mine that had 1 parent and 4 kids. I know I'm not the only one in Colorado that it was like that or is like that, and to have to force something like that on somebody just to comply with a new rule that we're instilling in the middle of the night right now seems to me the height of unfairness. So I strongly urge an aye vote on this amendment.
Representative Soper.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I also rise in support of this amendment. Folks, it's the 21st century. We should be able to do more things online. I mean, we've had a dozen bills at least this session that has promoted more online use. And to allow parents to be able to fill out the form online and submit it online is not only convenient, but it also saves taxpayer resources that will take a major burden off of the state as well. We wouldn't have to have as many people working in physical departments just to handle the raw paperwork that's coming through. The internet is certainly an amazing thing, and being from a rural part of the state, I can tell you that certainly it's going to reinvigorate our local economy. But to this amendment, you think about areas where, say, Paonia, it's an hour away from Delta. If you want to go down to the Department of Health, that's in Delta. You have to drive down just to submit a form. Or if you're in Gateway, in another part of my district, it's at least an hour to Grand Junction just to submit a form. And yet both of those towns have internet. They have the capacity to be able to fill out a form online and to be able to submit that form online. I don't see that this is unreasonable at all to ask this, and I would ask for a yes vote.
Thank
Is there
you.
any further discussion on Amendment L037? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of L037. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The amendment's lost. To the bill. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1312? Representative Williams. Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we also talked about how on back there in committee, how there was a real leaning towards one set of science over the other. And like I said earlier, I don't believe that we ought to be in the position as a state government to step in the middle of conflicting scientific opinions and say this is the right one for y'all to live by and not the other. But that is what is asserted in page 5, line 7. And what happens here is that the Department of Public and Health and Environment shall develop and make available to healthcare providers and facilities educational materials regarding the benefits of immunizations. So it does not give a balanced view in that, and it does not intend for there to be a balanced providing of educational materials looking at all contributions from science. It's only regarding the benefits. So there is no mention of educational materials providing also the risks. And so towards that, Mr. Chairman, I move L036 and ask, Madam Chair, I forgot who was back there. Thank you. I was with Representative Singer for so long, I got in a habit. I apologize, Madam Chair, but I ask that I move L036 and ask that it be displayed.
No problem, Representative. Amendment L036 has been moved, is properly displayed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is about as to the point of an amendment as one can have, and this merely adds and risks so that the educational materials that would be generated and provided would give the benefits, provide the benefits and the risks of immunizations.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Baisley, for giving us the opportunity to speak to this part of the bill. Because this part of the bill specifically talks about directing the CDPHE to develop educational materials around the benefits of immunizations. The risks are already talked about in the doctor's office. That's in law right now. That the risks have to be talked about and the contraindications have to be talked about in the doctor's office when immunizations are being given. And so that's in the law. That's a mandate. This bill does not mandate this education. It directs CDPHE to develop these materials that could be distributed to communities to show the benefits of immunizations. Previous bills, there's been mandatory education. That's not in this bill. And so all we're doing is developing materials around the benefits of immunizations because risks are already being talked about in the doctor's office when immunizations are being given. I ask for a no vote, please.
Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think the issue that we're trying to get to here is when a parent who is very concerned about the risks has taken the time to study the issue, educate themselves, and then they're presented with something that just sort of has this air of re-education or trying to inform them that really they don't understand the benefits when there are risks. I think that puts people off. So I think that's the problem there. So I think to have a more balanced approach is appropriate, and so I rise in support of this amendment and ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L036? Seeing none, Representative Van Winkle.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a very important piece to the bill. It provides some balance because there are risks. No doctor can look a patient in the face or a parent and say that 100% there are no side effects and there are no negative consequences. And to say that it happens in the doctor's office and that already happens, that's not completely accurate. I myself just went through an experience where we unexpectedly had a baby a month early. And it was kind of a quick process, and there was no conversation of, oh, here are the side effects, let's have this calm conversation over here. No, it was like, holy smokes, we're in labor. So I think this is a very important amendment, a very important thing to provide balance, because there are two sides here. There are risks that go with anything that you inject into your bloodstream. And I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in full support of this amendment. Just because of the experience I had with my granddaughter. There are benefits to immunizations, but they're not all benefits. And I think if the risks, if there's information there about the risks, I think that's very important. So I rise in full support of this amendment, and I thank Representative Baisley for bringing it.
Representative Geithner. You were first, please. Okay. Representative Carrera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as a practicing pediatrician, I just wanted to confirm that in my office, we give out the vaccine information sheets at the 2-week visit about every single vaccination that a kid is going to have for the first 12 months of life. And then we give it out with a packet at every single visit where they're going to have vaccines. We talk about risks and benefits. If your doctor doesn't do that, I apologize. Maybe you should discuss that with your doctor. But I don't think that we have to include the risks in the bill specifically, because that is something that your medical provider should already be doing.
Now, Representative Geithner, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, you know, I have 2 kids. I've been to the doctors, and I'm sure that we all walk out of there remembering every little thing that they told us. Every time. We never forget anything that they told us. And so adopting this and including it in the literature where it's clear, where it's available to them to reference upon getting home, only makes sense. They shouldn't have to go and look it up. They shouldn't have to go and reference it anywhere else. They should get it in their hand in black and white for them to take home with them, because as parents with crying kids, diaper bags, you name it, a lot going on, let's be honest. Sometimes it's hard for us to even remember our own names, let alone risks associated with a medical procedure. So, members, I think that adopting this is wise for those of us that are parents and we found ourselves there. Heck, right now at 2 o'clock through whatever time it is, I'm having a hard time remembering my name just because of fatigue. And if you've had a interrupted night of no sleep and you're off to the doctor's office and your doctor is telling you risks, if they happen to tell you the risks, I think this just adds an additional layer of information for that individual. Why are we afraid to include risks? What's the harm? If they're so risk-free, what's the harm in providing the risks and the information to the parents? So members, I would urge a yes on this, because, well, parents, while we're pretty good at things, we oftentimes forget things. So let's go ahead and give it in black and white.
Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there's really nothing wrong with giving both sides of the story. It's just information. Let the parents decide. Again, we really need to be cautious about what kind of impressions we're giving, that we're not trying to push the government's beliefs onto our parents. If you're only giving one side of the story, some parents could be very suspect that we're trying to push them into a certain decision. But just look at this with common sense. What's wrong with giving a list of risks? It's. I mean, if we just look at it just in a simple way, given risks along with the benefits, so the parents have the full information to make a decision. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And again, we are elected to represent our constituents. And it's extremely important to make sure that we give them full information, both sides of the story, to make sure they make the proper decision. We don't ever want to give the impression that we're only giving them part of the story, part of the information, to sway them into making a decision that we want them to make. Again, parental control, give them all the information they need, let them make the decision, keep our noses out of the relationship between them, their doctor, and their kids. But yeah, so you know, it just seems like on different aspects of this bill, I do come up here with concerns about giving full information, securing parental rights, and having privacy. I do stand in support of this amendment. I mean, just look at the amendment. We want to add information about a certain, I guess, vaccine that could possibly hurt somebody. We're not saying it's going to hurt somebody, but we're just providing information. It gets kind of scary if we get into a situation where we're trying to block information or not providing the full story to our citizens. And then on one end, we're saying, yeah, let's give the benefits. We're okay with that, but let's not give the risks. It just doesn't make any sense. It really sounds very suspect, and we don't want to sound that way. So again, let's give all the information we can give, and balanced approach. Let the parents make a proper decision, and go from there. So with that said, I stand in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Landgraf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're a different chair than there used to be up there. I have a question.
Got to take some breaks every now and then, you know.
We've been listening to this for hours, and we've heard, if I can remember, religious beliefs are not a problem. Risks and benefits aren't a problem. What else is not a problem? Homeschooling is not a problem. What else?
To the amendment, Representative Landgraf.
None of the amendments that we've brought up are a problem. They're already done. So I'm just curious, what are we trying to solve here? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? Because everything is already either done already, or it's not an issue, or am I making sense? Or is it just too early in the morning or too late at night to even begin to make sense? But I'm sitting back there, and it dawned on me that everything we've heard is either already done, or it's not a problem, or it's not an issue, or it doesn't matter, or it something. And I thought, so what are we doing?
Representative Landgraf,
We've been doing it for a long time.
Representative Mullica, if you wish to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question, Representative Landgraf. I think what I'm doing here tonight is I'm trying to pass legislation to protect our students. That's what I'm doing here, and our children. Now, in regards to this amendment, what we've talked about is that risks are already talked about as a part of this process, a part of the immunization process. When you go to your doctor's office, it's in law that you need to be issued the information sheets so that you can see what the contraindications are and what the risks are for those immunizations. And that's what I'm bringing up, is that we already have that. And that there's no mandatory part of this in regards to CDPHE developing the information or the education around the benefits of immunization. And so, but there is a mandate that the risks are already being talked about, or the parents should be being educated about. And that's what I brought up on this amendment.
Thank you.
Representative Buck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's an honor to work with you.
It's an honor to serve with you too, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. But I have to tell you, when I say that I've heard from my constituents, I've heard from my constituents, and I'm so grateful when I do hear from them. But I have to ask all the members that are inside on the floor if you looked around at 2:15 in the morning and you see some incredible parents that are here because of this bill. They have been here all night long, and they are going past the 12 o'clock hour. It is, like I said, 2:15, and they are still here at the Capitol, and they care like no tomorrow. They're all waving up there. Good morning, everyone. I can't thank you enough for being here and joining us at the Capitol. This is not a bill to be taken lightly. And I support this amendment because I don't see any reason, if you're going to go and throw out that there's benefits, by golly, you better also say there are risks. So I ask a yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you all for hanging with us and joining with us and spending your evening with us. Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that one of the answers to the questions that Representative Landgraf were asking, what we're going for here, one of the things, I guess I can answer that by trying to say what we're not going for is fairness. I recognize that at doctor's offices, it may be in law that there's a sheet of paper given with a list of risks. But I have to say that when I went in to a doctor's office with a child once, I had read an article, and knowing my child had some issues, I had some questions about, okay, which shots should she get today? And should she get these ones, or maybe I should wait till next time? And I had questions for the doctor. Well, it was actually the physician's assistant. All she could do was tell me about the benefits and why I should get them right now today and not wait. And as a matter of fact, when I hesitated and showed some hesitation, well, what about this fever? And I mean, I just had a few more questions. And she ended up leaving to go get the doctor, who then came back and gave me more information about the benefits. And I was saying, well, what about what she's been experiencing lately? And I did specifically ask about risks. And I'm really glad to know that our resident doctor here does give a list of the risks that comes from the manufacturer, and that she gives the list of risks out at the 2-week checkup. I'm glad to hear that, because I did not get that. I do admit this was several years ago, but I'm just concerned that then after being literally told over and over again at the doctor's office of the benefits of getting the full array of shots that day, even with a child that was not feeling well and actually was sick. If I had then had to go to the health department and gotten a list of benefits but no risks, I would have been very concerned about just the fairness of it, the equalness of it, and if somebody's trying to push something that may or may not be appropriate for my child. And I'm thinking that this might be a very good amendment and just an easy way to resolve the issues of parents that may be honestly searching for information that they have every right to have. We've heard over and over again, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. Of course, spoken in a very sarcastic tone of voice. I don't want to encourage people to Google for answers to these medical questions. I would much prefer them to have answers on both sides, either in their doctor's office or at the health department. And I think adding a sheet that has both benefits and risks is a very small ask. And actually just to flip the sheet over and have the risks also, I just don't think that is anything that we should be hiding from parents that may be honestly searching for answers. And if we're purposefully trying to push them one way or the other, that honestly, I think that that's a good way for people to actually start sitting up straight and being even more concerned if they're searching for answers. So with that, once again, I urge a yes vote on this amendment, and thank you.
Representative Geithner. Representative Sandrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve with you.
It's a pleasure to serve with you, sir.
Okay. Obviously, I said before, I stand in support of this amendment. Again, I'm not going to stand up here and say I'm pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. It's none of my business if a parent wants a vaccine or not vaccine, or none of my business if for them to justify it to me. But I think if we're going to provide information as in benefits, I mean, there are so many benefits to vaccinations. And, but I think, again, a balanced approach. You have maybe on one side the benefits, on the other side some hazards. And some of the hazards associated with, when we talk about risks that should be right next to the benefits are on some vaccines you could possibly get pronounced swelling, redness, heat, or hardness at the site of the injection. That should be right next to the benefit. Possibly body rash or hives, shock or collapse. You could collapse after one of these vaccines. Some could, but there are also benefits too, but we should acknowledge the risks. High-pitched screaming or persistent crying for hours. Again, maybe that should be added along with the benefits. Extreme sleepiness or long periods of unresponsiveness. It may be rare. It may be rare, but maybe those should be added along with the benefits, this information. Wait, I got one. Twitching or jerking of the body, arm, leg, or head. It's true. Again, there's benefits. Maybe we should just throw this information in as well to make sure the parents have the full information. Crossing of eyes. Crossing of eyes should be added in with the benefits. Weakness or paralysis of any part of the body should be added with the benefits, so the parents can make the proper decision. Loss of ability to roll over, sit up, or stand up. Probably something you need to know before you inject your child with this substance. Loss of eye contact or awareness of social withdrawal. So it's not all physical. It could be social ramifications for some of these. Again, not saying they're bad, not saying they're good. I'm just saying the parents need to have all the information. Here we got one. Head banging or onset of repetition of movements, flapping, rubbing, rocking, spinning. Those should possibly be added with the benefits, the risk and the benefits combined. High fever over 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Should know this. Vision or hearing loss. It's nothing wrong with adding this information in because you don't want to be surprised or your child be surprised if there's vision or hearing loss. If you know it could possibly take place, it won't be as much as a shock. And these questions, if you know this information, you could ask your doctor questions prior to giving authorization. Restlessness, hyperactivity, or inability to concentrate. Maybe cloudiness. That'd be nice to know beforehand and not be surprised. Sleep disturbance that changes a sleep pattern. But what about, don't you want to hear about joint pain? There could be joint pain. So I think all we're asking is that there can be, even though it could be rare, risk. And we should have these in with the benefits so the parents make the decision and we don't just give pieces of information trying to force the parents to make a decision that certain government officials want. So with that said, I ask for an aye vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on Amendment L036? Representative Geithner, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I would just offer, since we're talking about risk and benefit, there's an element of distrust in terms of vaccinations not providing risk along with the benefit that they may provide. And so if we're looking to build trust in and around this topic, then maybe offering what those risks are in writing would go to help building that level of trust. I mean, am I right? I mean, if we're going to be fully transparent, we're going to provide information and arm parents with information, that goes a long way in building trust. Second, if there are negative reactions that happen as a result of a vaccination, having those risks in writing will help the parent be able to potentially identify the injury that may be taking place right after that vaccination or within the hours or the 24 hours right after. I mean, does that seem to make sense? I mean, if we provide the risks, then the parent can, something's going wrong, they can say, oh, wait a minute. Let me refer to the risks that were associated with the vaccination that my child just got. That may be able to get medical treatment to that child much more quickly because now they have something in writing. When they're flustered, when they see their child having a negative reaction to a vaccination, they can refer to that list. Certainly, we can agree that by providing the information and the risk, that we are looking out for the benefit of the child. So let's put the side of the parent, let's put parents aside and everything else. Let's talk directly about how we can potentially help the child by making sure that the risks are in the hand of the parent, and when they leave the doctor's office, they can refer to those risks should the child start to undergo something negative as a result of that vaccination. They can immediately identify it because it's on the risk portion of that insert, and they can go ahead and they can react. I think that's fair. And I would offer this as well to the sponsor. I understand that you're trying to protect children, but parents are trying to protect their children. And I think this goes a long way in helping them know what to look for so that they can do what they are responsible for doing, which is protecting their child. And so I would urge a yes on this amendment. I get it that some may look at this as filibustering. I have 5 inserts at my desk for the vaccinations. I am way too happy to go get them, and we can start reading them. And we can go over everything that's in those inserts. But the idea of this amendment simply just says that while the physician may inform the parent of what those risks are, this one says that it's in writing, so that if the child starts to go through some sort of a negative reaction, the parent can reference that piece of paper, that documentation with those risks, identify what it is, and get medical attention to that child much more quickly. I think a failure to adopt this exposes these children to greater risk, and not adopting this, and remember, first we do no harm. I urge you to support this amendment.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was listening to this, I realized what an excellent point has been made by the representatives on this particular amendment. Think back to the last time you saw an advertisement on any kind of medicine, on TV, any place else. What tends to happen at the end of that advertisement? There's a very long disclaimer. And the disclaimer on this evening/morning at 2 a.m. should be, this is the Colorado General Assembly on 13/12, right? All the symptoms that were described earlier could be attributed to us at the moment because we're very tired. Right? Lack of sleep, change in sleep patterns, twitching, So, but the important point to make here is this. If we have that disclaimer and requirement on these other medications, and as we heard earlier from the doctor on this side of the aisle, and we can read to you lots of other publications from very respected universities that say there's always going to be a risk attached to vaccines. shouldn't there be some list of risks that a parent could see to say, this could happen to your child? This could happen to the most important person in your life, the person that you are supposed to protect, the person that you are parenting. That these side effects could happen, adverse risks could happen. So I just want to make sure that we really underscore this. This is an excellent point that they are making. If there's a disclaimer on everything else out there that we put into our bodies, why not this? Why not this? These manufacturers don't have to put a disclaimer on this. These manufacturers don't have to put a disclaimer on these things that go in children's bodies. Big corporations don't have to put a disclaimer on what goes into children's bodies. Are we all hearing this? I know we're tired. This has been raised by parents in social media. It's been raised in these emails. It's a good point, especially since they're shielded from liability. Now, we all want to think that big corporations have our best interests in mind because they have families too. We hope that they use their own products on themselves and their families. We want to think that these businesses, large or small, large corporations, have our best interest in mind. But in reality, I do want to point out, if someone is shielded from liability, what kind of behavior are we encouraging? At the very least, members, we can at least inform parents of the risks that are documented in publications that are peer-reviewed, that are scientific. Not everyone is the same, and viva la difference, right? We talk about diversity in this body all the time. We react differently to different things. Some of us are allergic to certain foods, and yes, some of us are allergic to certain vaccines. Now, there's a couple pieces of information that I'm going to bring to you today, members, that I think is going to be extremely helpful in our discussion. It may be a little long, and I apologize for that. But in the meantime, to this amendment, Madam Chair, I am going to ask for a yes vote. This is the very least we can do if we're shielding large corporations from immunity, and everything else in the entire world requires a disclaimer. What we put in the children's bodies should also have a disclaimer.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L036? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Amendment L036. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The amendment's lost. To the bill. Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L052. And ask that it be.
The amendment has been moved and is properly displayed. Representative Beckman, please explain.
Thank you. We spent a lot of time this evening and this morning talking about how we wanted to make sure this information was confidential and protected. We had an amendment that talked about destroying documents, and we had a lot of discussions about what information is going to be in those forms. And as I sat and Googled the CIS program and memorandums of understanding and data use sharing agreements, it's amazing what I found, because actually this information is shared with lots of folks. It's very easy to get. And I don't think that's what we're committing to those who are giving their information, that it is shared with research organizations. CDPHE recognizes that it may become necessary for specific authorized entities to obtain potentially identifying data from confidential records held by CDPHE, and that is through the SIS program, the Colorado Immunization Information System. Access to potentially identifying information may be provided if all the following conditions are met, and there's a little questionnaire here for research organizations. And so it's pretty easy to get this information, and no wonder people are concerned about their information being tracked and shared and integrated with other information. The other thing that is happening is they're integrating this information, that little bit of identifying information they get, with organizations that have more information, like WIC. They are, every 2 weeks, actually, they're integrating the data so that you have the information that you have given from SIS with all of the very personal identifying information from WIC, and then they are using it actually to do information for vaccination outreach. So at the very least, we should make sure that the information that is given, because people are pretty suspicious of giving their information, they don't feel that this is a doctor or their nurse. They feel like this should be medically protected. So this allows for it to be shared with healthcare providers, hospitals, and schools, but not research organizations and other government programs, and who else, who knows who else they might be sharing this personal information with. I actually think I didn't get it on the amendment, but it would be great to have also, when you go in and give this information, because people are a little bit tentative about having your personal identification tracked, that the form that you sign should say that this identifying information will be shared, because it is being shared. It is being shared already. This is being shared in memorandums of understanding. It's being shared in data sharing agreements. I've read the statute over here. We can't find where they're supposed to be doing this, so we want to make sure that they aren't doing this, because that's not the commitment that we're making to the good people of Colorado in these debates. This information is to go into a system for public health, not for all this research, not to help with whatever they're doing or other programs. It's supposed to go to the schools and the medical providers and hospitals. We all understand that need. So I would ask for the sponsor to support this amendment. I think it's a good amendment. As we wrap up this discussion tonight, I think it would be show in good faith that we want this data to be confidential. We have said that. We want this data to be personal, and we don't want it shared because CDPHE says they think it needs to be given to other organizations, and that they recognize that it may become necessary to specifically authorize entities to get this personal data.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Beckman. It's truly been a pleasure working with you on this bill and addressing some of the concerns. And to talk about this amendment, I think it's important that, one, we have to bring up again that they can opt their information out from this system. And so that information would be inaccessible, and it would just be the aggregate data that we've talked about if they choose to opt out. And so that option is in front of them. And I think what we have to also remember, too, is that CDPHE must comply with HIPAA. And to comply with HIPAA means you're not sharing that information with entities that are not authorized to have that information specifically for medical purposes. And so I believe that it's being currently addressed either opting out and or through HIPAA guidelines, which CDPHE must follow. And so with that, I would ask for a no vote.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Mullica, I just want truth in advertising. I mean, we've been talking all night about this being confidential and not shared. And actually on the immunization schedules, it says this is completely confidential. Well, sharing it and data sharing it and memorandums of understanding, even when you go to the doctor, you have to sign. Do you want your data information shared? Do you want your personal, do you want it shared? Can we share it? So at least we should, and maybe it's for tomorrow, a third reading amendment, we should at least say on the form, your information is going to be shared. It's going to be shared with research organizations. It's going to be shared with other human service organizations, which may be TANF, WIC, food stamps, other benefits, which takes the data and integrates it. So you may be only giving your name, but some other benefit gives Social Security, other identifying information, and all of a sudden, CDPHE has all of your information, because that's what data integration does. So we should at least be honest with the public and say, right now, what's going to happen to your information if you bring it in, it's going to be shared with a lot of people. And with the research information, I'm actually surprised at how little of a form you have to fill out, but they can share specific procedures detailing how they have to share how it will be analyzed, but they can get very specific information, identifying information through just filling out a form. And CDPHE makes that decision. So if that's what we're going to do, I just would like people to know that. Because what we've been talking about is how we're going to destroy the documents, and this is going to be and it's not going to be given to anybody else. And this is actually through the Colorado, the memorandums of understanding is through the Department of the Information Technology organization is doing these MOUs, and that is the organization that had the big data breach. And so I just think we need to be truthful with people. We act like that is not a legitimate issue, but it obviously is, because we have data sharing agreements, memorandum of understanding, and this information can flow in a lot of different directions. So I would ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I understand that if a parent chooses to opt out of SIS, then their information arguably wouldn't go in there. But there's two systems. And the two systems, the other one, the database that we've talked about, database, we can debate that next if you want. But there is a database that has the information in it. And so what we're saying here is that information that's stored there shouldn't be shared. And while I realize that there maybe is an argument to be made about HIPAA and how HIPAA would prevent it, so the examples that are in these sheets, does WIC not need to comply with HIPAA? Because you've got evidence right here where WIC is sharing data from SIS and other databases. So if one government system can do it, then certainly another one can. This secure database is nothing, it's not immune in some way that WIC isn't. You know, data sharing is a real thing.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Representative Geithner. I think, you know, we have to focus on CDPHE, and I appreciate the questions and the concerns that are coming up. And I'll be honest, I don't know the answers on WIC or of other government entities, but focusing on CDPHE, knowing that they have to comply with HIPAA regulations. I can't, like I said, I can't speak to the other government entities, but where the data is being stored is at the CDPHE, and that's what I'm speaking to in regards to having to comply with HIPAA. If there's other information that's being stored with other government entities, I can't speak to that. I'm only speaking to the information that's being stored at this entity that must comply with HIPAA, and hopefully that helps you a little bit.
Representative Beckman to the amendment, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, In this memorandum of understanding, just so we all know that we're dealing with CIS, the Colorado Immunization Information System, is a confidential population-based computerized system that consolidates immunization information for all Coloradoans, and get this, and also manages the federal Vaccines for Children program that provides vaccines at no cost to children. So they're one and the same. But what this is doing is we are limiting the amount of data. That's the commitment we've made. We're limiting the amount of identifiable data to maybe even a name. They're bringing data from WIC and integrating it so that now they have the name, the address, the other democratic ethnicity, race, gender, address, phone number, email, and then they're doing outreach to those people that are in this system. So that's fine. This amendment, we can either pass it or not. At least people will know that when we say this information is confidential and that this is all the information that we're going to get and we're going to shred the documents as soon as you fill them out so you don't have to worry, that is not factual. We got a memorandum of understanding and a data sharing agreement that I found on my computer in like 15 minutes. I'm sure there are others out there. They are sharing this information. So it's not in the statute. We can't find it in the statute. So why don't we make it very transparent and be truthful in what we're telling people, that we're not going to data share this information. We're not going to give it to other organizations. And we're not going to take a bunch of other information and integrate it so that we don't need to get it from you right now, but that we can get it from other organizations, and we can call you up and try to get you. They're actually using it to call people up to make sure they get their vaccinations, which I don't know if that's appropriate or not. But I would like you to vote for this amendment. I think it's a good amendment, or else we would just need to be truthful to people that your information is not confidential, and that CDPHE is sharing it pretty liberally at that.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the sponsor, I wouldn't ask for you to speak to WIC. I'm not sure how they operate, and I realize that this bill 1312 deals with CDPHA. But that's what I'm asking us to speak to, is I'm asking us to speak to the data sharing that there is evidence of in other government organizations.
Let's stick to this bill.
This is to the amendment.
Okay, CDPHE, please.
And so when we see evidence in other government organizations sharing data, it's important that we recognize that and put safety guards in place so that it doesn't happen here. This amendment does that. I urge a support or a yes vote on 052.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment 052? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Amendment 052. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Amendment 052 fails. Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1312? Seeing none, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have another amendment to offer, but in the meantime, I just want to add to this discussion. I've had a lot of feedback from folks that said vaccines are 100% safe. I'm not sure I understand what the debate is and why you're down here for so many hours. So I just want to reiterate a couple things. One is we are all different and react differently to different things. Let me read you just real quick, just a few, not all of this very long list that could take a long time. But just in some of these, like the DTAP, here are some of the ingredients. Fenton medium containing a bovine extract, modified Latham medium derived from bovine, casein formaldehyde, modified strainer Schulte liquid medium, glutaraldehyde, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly at this point in the morning, aluminum hydroxide, sodium chloride, polysorbate 80. If you go through a lot of these, the list of all these vaccines and what's contained in them, I see an awful lot of formaldehyde. I see an awful lot of certain aluminum salts and other things that, if you look on some of these Department of Psychology websites for many universities across the nation, they do link some of these to Alzheimer's and other conditions. So I just want to make sure everybody understands why some folks may choose not to put some of these things in their children's bodies because they may not react well to them. So this is a real concern. I think this adds to the discussion. In the meantime, I'm going to move L051 and ask it to be properly displayed.
Amendment L051 has been moved. It is properly displayed. Representative Same, please explain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So earlier, we discussed an issue that was really just brought to light recently because a lot of us aren't experts on this particular issue. I think the majority of us on this side of the aisle do the full schedule of vaccines. I know I vaccinate my child. So we're not aware of some of these things. I was not made aware of this because I'm not an expert on this particular issue. I do not sit on a health committee and hear these bills. But one of the things that was brought to my attention is the fact that as the bill stands, you are doing and accomplishing certain things with this bill that Representative Mullica's constituents have asked him to do. But one of the things this bill does do, but I don't think his constituents and most of us don't understand, is the fact we are creating two classes of citizens. I think this may be unlawful, by the way, but that's up to the courts to decide. But in the meantime, this should also be a huge consideration for us as well, and why would we do this? Why wouldn't we make certain parents second-class citizens based on their choice of what to put in their child's body? If you follow the schedule, as recommended, you keep your FERPA protection. Schools are required to gather this. If they're required to gather this information by our current law, then parents fall under FERPA protection. The minute that somebody decides not to inject their child with a vaccine because of the risk, and they want to have the choice if there's risk, they give up FERPA protection. That's a problem. So I just want to let everyone know I have talked with the sponsor about this amendment. I was hoping to be passed about 3 or 4 hours ago. I think that would have really accelerated the activities this morning, but I think this is a very important amendment. I know our parents are talking about it online right now. Yes, they are still up and watching us. This is a big deal to them. I think this is a big deal to everybody who knows about it, that they didn't realize the bill did this, whether they're for the bill or against the bill. Nobody should be made a second-class citizen because of a choice they make as a parent. Why would we as a body do that? So members, I'm going to ask for a yes vote on this amendment. This is an important piece of the discussion. I think it's kind of a finishing piece to the last amendment we had discussed. And again, I thank the sponsor for spending so much time with us today, yesterday, the day before, earlier in the session. But really, this is something that is changing people's minds right now in real time. I've never received so many emails from Democrats saying thank you on any issue ever before. I've received them on Senate Bill 181. I've received them on many bills this session, but I've never received so many on one subject. And I can read you emails if you like where somebody has actually said, I am changing my affiliation right now. Now, you've all received those emails at one time or another on a different issue, but I've never received so many at one point in time. So, members, this is that important, that people are up with us. At what time is it?
It's 2:54, Representative Same. Please continue.
2:54 a.m. That they are up with us at 2:54 a.m. still giving us emails. It's that important. So if there's one amendment that passes in addition to the excellent work that was already done, it should be this one. Ask for a yes vote.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is obviously a really passionate issue across the board on both sides, and I appreciate that. And there's a lot of work that's gone into this and to try to make this the best policy that we can. Members, the way that I read this amendment, though, is that it would basically not, it would null and void the process that we try to create with this bill, and parents would not be able to actually turn that form into the CDPHE. I appreciate talking about FERPA. With this new process, though, we do have protections in place at the CDPHE with HIPAA to also protect this information. For that reason, I would ask for a no vote.
Representative Ransom.
I appreciate the sponsor's clarification that HIPAA applies to CDPHE, but if you read the provisions in HIPAA, they are allowed to share the information and data with many, many other places. If you take a look at what HIPAA says, yes, there are some protections, and I know that every time we go to a doctor's office or a pharmacy, we sign our HIPAA waivers, but FERPA is actually much stronger. It is much stronger data privacy within the school system. So just equating the two is really not fair. And we have parents that understand the difference between the two and are very anxious to protect their rights under FERPA, and just having somebody say, well, you can have HIPAA at the health department, is just, it's not an equivalent, it's not sharing properly, it's not an equivalent trade, because again, the protections at the schools through the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act is different than HIPAA, the Health Information and HIIPA. So please, everybody remember that there is a huge difference between the two. I appreciate Representative Sane for bringing this amendment as an alternative, and I hope that you will truly take into account that there are parents here, and as she said, my phone keeps lighting up and making noise quite often too. There are hundreds of parents watching right now, if not more than hundreds, that are very, very concerned about losing their rights, and just saying that you have HIPAA protection at CDPHE is not the same as FERPA protection at the schools. Please remember that, and I strongly urge an aye vote on this amendment.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Ransom, for pointing that out. It's not the same. The protection that the parents get who have to go to CDPHE to turn in the form is not the same. Thank you for acknowledging that. The other thing I want to talk about just very quickly, and what this amendment solves, is, members, the stated intent of the bill was twofold, as far as I could tell, and I did reconfirm this. The stated intent was, if there is an outbreak, and let's just say measles, because that's been in the news lately, if there is a health or safety event like measles, the idea was the ability to contact those folks in that school, in that community, and warn them. I agree with that. And warn them and say, we've got an outbreak. I see here that your child is unvaccinated. And actually, members, based on the information we've been talking about, we should also warn those who are vaccinated. Because we've also had outbreaks in schools, primary and secondary, where everybody had, like 99% of the students had a full schedule. So we should be warning everybody. But anyway, currently what happens if there is a health or safety event under Colorado state law, schools are allowed to share PII to CDPHE, who can then turn around and warn those students and parents, we've got an outbreak. You might want to vaccinate your child or get another booster. That's current law. Let's keep that piece, because we want to make sure we are not creating second-class citizens, and that way all parents have equal protection, and we're doing exactly what the bill sponsor wants to do, if that really is one of the stated goals.
Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Please continue, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So members, we have that piece in law already. It works. If the stated goal is if there's a measles outbreak, that we alert these communities to make sure that they get a booster or they vaccinate their child or remove their child from the situation if there's danger. We can do that now. This amendment allows us to do that now while keeping FERPA protections for all parents. I'm going to ask for a yes vote again. I do want to make sure we're honoring that stated intent by the sponsor. If there is an outbreak, if there is a health or safety event, whether that's measles, polio, Ebola, whatever it is, this amendment allows that, without giving less protection to parents that choose not to vaccinate on the same schedule, who may choose to opt out of one vaccine for many reasons. One of which could be the child is already battling an illness and a doctor has recommended that they do not vaccinate at that time. There's many reasons. So again, I will renew my call on a yes vote on this amendment. Let's keep those FERPA protections in place for everyone and honor the intent of what we're trying to do with this bill here tonight, members.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the amendment L051. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Amendment fails. To the bill. Any further discussion on House Bill 1312? Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank everyone for a robust debate tonight. It's obviously a very passionate issue, but no. And I just wanted to take that opportunity to say thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had a lot of debate tonight. Representative Mullica, I appreciate your compassion for the kids and for their safety. I just ask you again to think of your own child and your compassion you feel for them. That's what these parents feel for their own kids. And I don't see how mandated paperwork and government intervention is going to help that. So I would strongly urge a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1312. Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one last thing, because I did say that I would deliver this particular message tonight. And there's one email I received from a lady. You may have received it as well. And I think this is an important part of the discussion, and please don't sigh, but a lady named Lisa strongly opposes this bill. She says, I watched my stepdad become paralyzed from the waist down after receiving his flu shot, which sparked my interest in educating myself on vaccines. He was originally diagnosed with whatever GBS, I'm not going to pronounce that tonight, but but because of such a rapid onset of paralysis, they changed his diagnosis to transverse myelitis. I do believe that vaccines have helped lower the cases of certain diseases, and my child has had vaccines. However, I think the way that CDC schedules vaccines is unnecessary and potentially harmful. There are currently 72 doses of vaccines on CDC's childhood vaccine schedule. That's a 300% increase from the 24 doses that were scheduled when I was a child. Also, the CDC states that the vaccine adverse event reporting system receives approximately 300,000 reports annually and it is estimated that only an average of 5% of adverse reactions are even reported. $4 million has been awarded to patients who have suffered vaccine injuries. Injuries that were proven in court to have been caused by vaccines. $4 million that comes from tax dollars because pharmaceutical companies producing vaccines were freed from liability. This makes me question why vaccines aren't tested for their carcinogenic or mutagenic potential, nor is CDC 72-dose childhood vaccine schedule tested for safety. I also have questions because if you look at some of those lists, I didn't read all of it, but because they're made with aborted fetal cells as well as EPA toxins, like formaldehyde, thimerosal, aluminum. I want to be a little bit more clear, and this is Lisa speaking, just so everybody knows. Lisa says, I am not an anti-vax mother. I am a mother that questions the safety of vaccines because I've been one of many who witness adverse reactions and events. My child's physical, mental, and emotional health is my #1 priority, which is why I want to know more about a product that is declared unavoidably unsafe before I continue to inject it in my child. So again, I'm not against vaccines. I am a pro-vaccine education, pro-informed consent, and pro-medical freedom mother, and I thank you for your time tonight. And members, just back to the point that was made earlier, is they care about their children. There should be choice when there is risk, and I urge a no vote on this bill.
Seeing no further, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members, I'll make this one brief. I just think it's important that I acknowledge parents that have committed to fighting this from the time that we heard it in a committee room. There was 2 overflow rooms sometime in February, and that have stayed up engaged tonight. I just wanted to thank you all.
Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the passage of House Bill 1312. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. House Bill 1312 passes. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 159.
Senate Bill 159 by Senators Bridges and Donovan, Representative McCluskey, concerning continuation of the passage of Tramway Safety Board in connection with the bringing some of the recommendations contained in 2018 and some sort of report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies.
Representative McCluskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 159 to the Committee of the Whole with for a favorable recommendation.
Representative McCluskey, let's go ahead and go to 159, please.
Excuse me, Madam Chair?
To the bill.
Thank you. Senate Bill 159 renews and authorizes our Tramway Safety Board. Tramways include aerial tramways, aerial lifts, what we commonly call chairlifts up in the high country. And after the DORA Sunset Review, the value of this important board and their authority over the safety and security of our tramways was realized. The bill does 3 things: authorizes the renewal until 2030, removes the requirement of sending letters of admonition via certified mail, and replaces program administrator with program director. With that, I urge and I vote for the important Tramway Safety Board reauthorization.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 159? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Senate Bill 159. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Senate Bill 159 passes. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 160.
Senate Bill 160 by Senator Winter, also Representative McCluskey, concerning the continuation of the River Outfitter licensing program.
Representative McCluskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the snow melts, and then we have rivers. Senate Bill 160. We are renewing the River Outfitter licensing program until 2028. Exempts this program from private occupational schools, which is a part of the Division of Higher Ed, and also allows the Commission to promulgate rules and requirements for river outfitters across the state. And I urge an aye vote for this reauthorization.
Representative McCluskey, would you move the bill, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 160 to the Committee of the Whole.
Seeing no more discussion, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of Senate Bill 160, please say aye. Opposed? No. That bill passes. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 161.
Senate Bill 161 by Senators Bridges and Story, also Representative Kipp, concerning the continuation of the State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education in connection with them with the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunset Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies and making an appropriation.
Representative Kipp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I am honored to be here hours before sunrise to have my sunset bill done. The State Advisory Council for
Representative Kipp, I know you're excited, but would you move the bill, please?
I'm sorry. I move SB 19-161. The State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education was created in 2009 to increase parental involvement in public schools with the intent of reducing achievement gaps, decreasing the dropout rate, increasing graduation rates, and increasing the number of students who continue on to higher education. The Advisory Council meets to review best practices and make applicable recommendations to educators and policymakers regarding increased parent involvement in the educational process. And I do have one short amendment, if I could also move SB 161 L.001 that Representative Wilson asked for during committee.
Amendment L001 has been moved and is properly displayed. Representative Kipp, please explain.
Thank you. Originally, the SACPI, as it's called, was to sunset never, indefinitely, and this amendment merely says it's going to do it in 5 years.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to Representative Kipp on addressing this issue. DORA tends to, when they make a recommendation, if it's worked the first time, they say, forget about it, it's fine, just let it go. And as many of you are already starting to realize, I think it's a good idea to have those pop back up so people realize what we're actually doing. And Representative Kipp did that and accommodated that, and I recommend an aye vote on the amendment.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L001? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Amendment L001. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Amendment L001 passes. To the bill.
It's a great bill. I hope that you vote yes. It's worked for the last several years. I think it could work for more.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 161? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of 161 as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Senate Bill 161 passes. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 163.
Senate Bill 163 by Senator Marble, also Representative Galindo, concerning the continuation of the cold case task force in connection with the implementing of the recommendations contained in the 2010 Census Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies.
Representative Galindo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 163.
To the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this bill would basically renew the Colorado Cold Case Task Force that was established in 2007. And it's a great task force that has helped us solve a lot of cold cases and establish infrastructure in various communities in order to do so. So I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 163? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Senate Bill 163. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Senate Bill 163 passes. Mr. Randall, Assistant Majority Leader Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
You have heard the motion. Seeing No objections. That's the word. Seeing no objection, the committee will rise and report.
The House will come back to order. I bet some of you have never been so happy as to hear my voice as right now. Okay. Let's see, what is this? Marilyn, what are all these? Okay, the Representative Gray? Oh, I'm sorry. No, hold on. Mr. Randall.
Madam Speaker, your committee will basically report it has had under its consideration for types of recommendations thereon. House Bill 1312 is amended passing or growth which kind of a third degree final passage. Senate Bill 159, Senate Bill 160, Senate Bill 161 is amended. Senate Bill 163 passing or revised place kind of a third reading final passage.
Now, Representative Gray. You have heard the motion. There are amendments at the desk. Mr. Randall, please read the Geithner amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Geithner moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole reverse the action taken by the committee in not adopting the following Geithner Amendment L050 to the Mullica Amendment L039 to House Bill 1312 shows that Geithner Amendment passed in that House Bill 1312 as amended passed.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move the Geithner Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this was the amendment that I offered that said that we should not include any personally identifiable information. I would urge a yes vote on this amendment. I think it is good. I think it will protect families and children. Again, I would urge a yes vote on this. Thank you.
Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would urge a no vote, please.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is passage of the Geithner Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, the Geithner Amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the Williams Amendment.
Representative Williams moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole reverse the action taken by the committee in not adopting the following Williams Amendment L048 to House Bill 1312 shows that and passed the House Bill 1312 as amended passed.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the Williams Amendment to the Committee of the Whole. And members, I'm just going to ask for a yes vote on this.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Mullica.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for a no vote.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, the Williams Amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the Geithner Amendment.
Representative Geithner moved to amend the Board of Committee of the Whole Diversity Action Committee Committee and not adopting and following Geithner Amendment L047, House Bill 1312 shows has been passed. House Bill 1312 is amendment passed.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the Geithner Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this amendment was one that basically reassured in policy that medical exemptions that are currently in place would not be degraded because it does speak to the language of ACIP. I think this is a wise amendment. This does not do anything to take away from the bill. It doesn't require anything additional to the bill. It simply just reinforces what the sponsor has already said is there in clear language. I think it is important that we offer this type of clarity in policy, and so I would urge a yes vote on this amendment.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would ask for a no vote, members, please.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the Geithner Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Representative Humphrey. Please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, the Geithner Amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the Baisley Amendment.
Representative Baisley moved to amend the Board of Committee of the Whole Diversity Action Committee and not adopting the following Baisley Amendment L037 to House Bill 1312 shows has been passed. House Bill 1312 is amendment passed.
Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the Baisley Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill simply removes the requirement to meet in person, and I request a yes vote.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Malika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for a no vote, please, members.
The question before us is the Baisley Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Please, oh, that's me. Please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, the Baisley Amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the next Baisley Amendment.
Representative Baisley moved to amend the Board of Committee of the Whole Diversity Action Committee and not adopting the following Baisley Amendment L036 to House Bill 1312 shows has been passed. House Bill 1312 is amendment passed.
Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the second Baisley Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This simply asks that we give folks the risks along with the benefits, and I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for a no vote, members.
The question before us is the passage of the Baisley Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Larson, please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, this Baisley Amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the Beckman Amendment.
Representative Beckman moved to amend the Board of Committee of the Whole Diversity Action Committee and not adopting the following Beckman Amendment L052 to House Bill 1312 shows has been passed. House Bill 1312 is amendment passed.
Representative Beckman. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the Beckman Amendment to the Committee of the Whole. Please proceed.
Thank you. This just stops data sharing and prevents data sharing of immunization identifying information, and I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for a no vote, members.
The question before us is the passage of the Beckman Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 26 aye votes, 38 no votes, and 1 excused, the Beckman amendment is lost. Mr. Randall, please read the same amendment.
Representative Sane moved to amend the Park Climate Diversity Action taken by the committee and not adopting the following same amendment L051 to House Bill 1312 so said and passed. House Bill 1312 is amended and passed.
Representative Sane.
Madam Speaker, I move the same amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This honors the intent of the sponsor to make sure we can alert people during events, at the same time making sure people are treated equally, and most important, children's protection and privacy are treated equally. I ask for a yes vote.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for no vote, members.
The question before us is the passage of the same amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Please close the machine. With 25 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 1 excused, the same amendment is lost. And that brings us to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members, please vote. Buck, Herod, Geithner. Oh, there we go. Please close the machine. With 40 aye votes, 24 no votes, and 1 excuse, the report of the Committee of the Whole is passed. Yay. Okay. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to let everyone, well, one, I moved to, I don't have to do anything right now because we're still in today. Members, just a quick announcement that we will come in at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. Today, sorry, today. Whatever, yeah, 11 a.m. today.
Are there any other announcements or introductions?
Sorry, and make sure you clear off your desks. And I want a special thanks to the sergeants and all the staff.
Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until later today.
The House will be in recess till later today.